Do you love Frank Whiteley? So do we. The Authority, Superman, Batman and Robin, Jupiter's Legacy. Now he has a new comic out this week with me, The Ambassadors Issue 1. Also on sale this month, The Ambassadors Issue 2, Nemesis Reloaded, Issue 3, The Magic Order 3, and Nightclub Issue 4 for only $1.99. Yes, The Ambassadors is out twice a month. I'm costing you a fortune. Hello. Hey there, buddy boy. How you doing?
Good, thanks. Good. How's yourself?
Not too bad at all. Where are you?
I'm in the studio.
On a Sunday?
It's my home studio.
Are you working or are you taking it easy today or what?
No, I've actually been working. Have we started recording? Or
Yeah,
is this...
This is everything you say is heard by millions of people now. Yeah.
But this isn't live, so you can edit out.
Oh yeah, anything terrible.
Edit it out.
So, that's fine. In libelous.
No, okay.
But what are you up to? You actually drawn today or what?
Believe it or not, this wee friend of mine, Father Bernard, asked me to decorate a Paschal candle for him, a big Easter candle. Right. So I have to do a kind of design and carve it out and paint it. So
does he know how expensive you are?
He has no idea. Every so often he sends me a WhatsApp and says, "Can you do me a favor?" And it's always something that takes days. So anyway,
yeah, it's funny, when you're a writer or an artist, people assume you just do it for free, kind of, don't they? So the number of times people have said to me, "Oh, could you write a school play for us?" And it's like that costs a lot of money.
Yeah, well, I used to do the face painting at the primary school, and funnily enough, Gary Erskine, although he didn't have any kids at the school, just because he was a local artist, he get drafted into it. So me and Gary would be sitting beside each other, doing all the kids' faces. And then there was one time my deadlines were so bad, probably during Jupiter's Legacy, but there was one time that the deadlines were so bad that I couldn't afford to take like half a day off. And this woman phoned from the school, and I was like, "I'm really sorry, I can't." She's like that, but you're the only artist we've got. And I was like, "Well, wait a minute, it's not a chef that's flipping the burgers. I mean, you don't need an artist to do face painting." So right enough. Okay. But,
I love that. It's like, do you think Picasso ever had this, or Monet or anything? There was people like, "Do us a favor, could you come and paint my living room for me?"
No, do you know this? The school also asked me to do a backdrop for the school play.
Right.
And I said, "What is it you want?" And they said, "Could you do it like the Globe Theatre?"
Oh my God.
Shakespeare's Globe Theatre. And I said, "Listen, that would take a long time. What I'll do is I'll do a line drawing of it on the sheet, and you can get the kids to basically colour it in." So she was fine with that. And I got my two boys, Vin and Joe, and a friend, Spartacus. The four of us, I drew it in paper, and then we squared it up. They gave us the backdrop, which was it was something like 8 meters by 6 meters or 10 meters by 6 meters. It was huge. Yeah. And we got like black acrylic paint. We all had we plastic tubs, and we did the whole thing, and the teachers were delighted with it. We did it in the dining hall on the floor. And once it was finished, we carried it in to the stage, and the back of the stage was like 5 meters by 2.5. The Janny had measured it, and they just measured it like completely wrong, and it was literally twice the size it needed to be. And it took us, it took four of us about, I don't know, 50 hours or something.
Oh my God. That's on eBay now, the Jannies get that on eBay.
Let's hope.
So you still got your studio? Hang on, you've got a pal called Spartacus, did you just say?
His name's actually Mark.
All right,
Mark Sparky Spartacus.
I see, that's fair enough. I was really impressed for a wee minute there.
But no, I don't have a studio in the town anymore. I used to have various studios in the city centre, and since 2019, it was like months before the pandemic.
Yeah.
I started working from home, and in kind of just into the new year, we've got a double garage, so we decided we'd get that converted, and it wasn't quite ready for the start of lockdown because remember there was loads of problems with everybody in the world doing DIY in their houses, so you couldn't buy wood or concrete or anything. So it actually took a bit longer, but yeah, that's. I mean, I've been working at home since 2019, so that's 4 years now. Been working at home.
I've actually seen it. The last time we were up, we were getting a curry up at yours, and
that's
I think it just finished or something around 2021 or 2022, something like this. Can't remember. We all came round for the night.
That must have been 20. Must have been 20.
Must have been breaking lockdown rules and coming round.
21 then maybe.
But
I'm sure we all wore masks.
That place that you had, the first one, I always remember your first studio. It seemed kind of glamorous because usually people work from a spare bedroom and you were working from a studio in the town. It seemed good, but it was a bit dingy, wasn't it? I mean, from outside, it looked like, you know, the place Harvey Keitel stood outside in Taxi Driver, you know, where the big shootout happened at the end. It had that vibe, didn't it?
Yeah. I seem to remember after the documentary, the What Do Artists Do All Day?
Yeah.
You described it as an Anne Frank crawl space. Which I thought was a bit harsh.
It was the second one you had, though, I remember was actually quite nice. Remember, it was in amongst real people, like regular people doing real jobs and things, you know, and you guys had that space in that big centre down by, what was it? It's near the Tron.
That was the Brigitte Centre.
Brigitte Centre, yeah. And it was people like selling sofas and stuff like that all around, but you guys...
No. It was... Section of it. That was a Wasp Studios place, so it was actually all people that were in some way linked to the creative arts. But I mean, there was a woman that had a loom and she was weaving, and there was somebody else who was a puppet maker. So it was quite... and there was a kind of gymnast circus training area in the back.
Makes sense. Yeah, makes sense.
But that's where I got my superhero skills.
Because that used to be like the place you went to buy a sofa and all that, didn't it? The Brigitte was like the 50 shop
years ago.
Yeah. But I remember I'd walk into your place sometimes and it'd be like 10 in the morning. There was always a bottle of wine opened and things. It always had a really relaxed vibe to it, didn't it? That wee place. And there was a few really nice people all sort of working alongside you, weren't there? You'd see somebody painting over in the corner. Working on a page and everything. A nice vibe, that place.
Yeah, all the studios I've been in have had other artists doing different things. I mean, occasionally there's been comic artists as well. I actually briefly shared a studio with Cameron Stewart.
All right.
He was, and Gary Erskine, and Jamie Grant, of course, because we were working together.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Do you think it actually, I've always wondered this with studios, like, do you think it actually encourages you to, one, work better because there's a slight competitive edge to a studio, or two, actually spur you on, like, to work faster? Or do you think it slows you down because it's suddenly an antisocial job becomes a social job?
No, I think there's something in a little bit of competitiveness, and it wasn't really competitiveness in terms of well, you know, we were all doing different types of art. You know, there were some people were doing animation, and there was some people doing like kind of like graphic design and stuff like that. But seeing other people getting on with their work, you know, like if you sat staring at the wall too long, somebody would actually nudge you and say you've not drawn anything for ages. Wow. But I was really worried because I had been working from home for about 20 years. Before I went into Hope Street Studios, and that was the first studio I had, and I thought I wasn't going to be able to work with other people around, and everybody just sits with their headphones on and gets on with their own stuff, and it was
not all chatter slowing you down. Then I thought there'd be a lot of just
action. But do you know what I remember about all the chatter? And it was only ever when people stopped to have coffee or lunch.
Yeah,
but there was a group of animators called the Farmers, and they did commercial animation. And there was another couple of girls that I knew that did kind of art house animation for public spaces. And everybody was sitting talking, and they were all talking about TV shows and movies and bands and stuff. And I actually felt like Tom Hanks, not Tom Hanks, but from what's his name, Robert De Niro from Awakenings, Remember, like,
you'd just been out of it for 20 years, kind of thing.
I hadn't watched telly. I hadn't watched telly for at least 10 years, maybe more.
Yeah.
And I always listened to Radio 4 because it just had interesting chat on it. So,
yeah.
I mean, I didn't know anything about music, movies, or TV shows. And I remember sitting thinking, this must be what it's like to be really, really old and not know what all the younger people are talking about. They were all roughly my age. So,
that's even worse, isn't it? You don't mind if it's people who are 20 years younger.
Yeah. I was so out of the habit of mingling with other people. I'd also stopped doing cons for 10 years at that point.
Because I feel you were always on the way to a con and some crack. So I always thought you had a really good work-life balance. I always thought you would draw it and end up with some random guy. You were away to some show in Eastern Europe or South America or something. I always felt you were on the road and doing loads of stuff with some interesting person at shows.
I had a really hopeless work-life balance. For the first 30 years, I worked between 6 and 7 days a week, and I generally worked pretty long hours.
Yeah.
When I worked at home, which was most of that time, I would, as soon as I'd finished my dinner, I would just go back to work.
Yeah.
And work until whatever time I could manage to work till, which could be 11 o'clock, could be 2 in the morning.
Just out of tiredness, like whenever you would just be tired to keep going, you mean? Yeah.
I would just keep going, and through necessity. And it got to the stage people used to come to the house and it would be like 9 o'clock in the evening. Yeah. And if I was like hanging about the kitchen making a cup of tea or opening wine or something, they'd be like, why are you not working? That's the way everybody used to greet me. Why are you not working? If I wasn't actually sitting working at the time.
Yeah.
And, that having been said, I also got the thing where everybody that needed a run to the airport would phone me up rather than phoning a taxi, just because I work from home.
People assume you're unemployed, somehow getting paid but unemployed.
Or somebody was getting a sofa delivered. They'd be like, could you sit in my house? I've got to go to work. But
did the kids, like, do you feel the kids kind of thought you were working all the time and everything? Did they have a sense you always been in your office? Like,
yeah, I mean, they used to come in and talk to me.
Yeah. I do the whole Shining thing. If they come in the door, I'm like, get out, like.
No, well, it's different for you because for writing, it's a different kind of concentration. Yeah. The only time where I can't have people about or can't have like talk radio on or podcasts or whatever is when I'm thumbnailing, when I'm reading the script and trying to work out the best way of telling the story. Once that part's over, if I'm just sitting penciling, and especially if I'm just sitting inking or colouring, I mean, it's like, I could practically be cooking at the same. No, I couldn't be cooking at the same time. But I mean, it's so much more relaxed. I don't need peace and quiet.
But all the British artists listen to Radio 4, don't they, while they're drawing? Once they've done the thumbnailing, they're listening to the Archers and things like that. I remember all the comic artists were talking about the Archers one time, and I'm like,
my generation do, but since the internet, obviously, like, like you can basically just listen to people talking about anything.
Yeah, I guess
because you've got the internet.
Podcasts are one of the others.
It used to be Radio 4 was your go-to place for kind of interesting conversations. But unfortunately, what would happen is, I was never a fan of the Archers, so what would happen is you'd be listening to something really interesting, it would finish, and then the Archers would start, or then it'd be Gardener's Question Time or Moneybox Live or something that you just didn't want to hear. But but now you can just pick and choose, of course. So.
It's funny because, like, I always remember that when you would see like Duncan Fegredo and Sean Phillips and all those guys together, they all seem to know loads about Radio 4, and I realised that's what it was. They were listening to this while they were drawing, But a podcast, it must be brilliant because you've got all day, really, and that can be good on in the background while you're.
Well, funnily enough, I was tuning into your Millar World podcast, and it's that thing people do, like you've got a list of choices, and you generally go for the one that's the shortest runtime. And I saw that Brendan McCarthy's was like over 2.5 hours, and I thought, I'm not listening to that. And sure enough, because I was sitting working, one finished, and then it went on to Brendan's, and I of course ended up just sitting listening to the whole thing.
The Brendan one's a beauty, isn't it? Like, I don't think Brendan really appreciates how much we all love him.
Yeah. Brendan's one of those. He's a real kind of artist. And I think he's actually. I think Brendan's been really influential, and I don't know if it's just that terribly British thing of playing everything down, or if he genuinely doesn't really know that he's had the influence on a couple of generations that he's had.
Oh, I don't think he realizes it. I mean, I've spent quite a lot of time with Brendan recently. He came out to see us and we hung about for a couple of days, and it's funny because I guess you don't hear the conversations about yourself, don't you? So when we were all starting out, I remember on 2000 AD and these things, Brendan's name was dropped more than anyone, wasn't it? He was like the go-to Judge Dredd artist. There was obviously some brilliant guys like Boland, Mick McMahon and so on, but everybody was trying to draw the helmet the way Brendan drew the helmet and everything, didn't
they? Yeah. I remember when you and I went to Sydney, and Brendan was staying in a flat in King's Cross, which was the red light district, and it was really, by Sydney standards, it seemed really sleazy and dangerous. Maybe it's because we'd come from Auckland the week before, which was like the politest place in the world. It was politer than Canada.
It was like Canada Square, wasn't it?
Brendan had a colour photocopier in his flat back when like nobody had a colour copier.
Yeah.
And he had a really big bundle of A3 printouts, and every single one of them was a movie pitch as a kind of poster with model sheets and a basic kind of breakdown of the story. And he just had scores and scores of ideas for TV shows and movies and comics that he wanted to get round to doing at some point.
He always seemed glamorous, didn't he? Because he crossed over so many media. Like we used to dream of the idea of doing something in Hollywood. It just seemed so far away, didn't it? You could barely get a Batman movie in those days, getting it made. And Brendan was just out there effortlessly, just working on everything, wasn't he? We knew he was working with Mel Gibson on the new Mad Max film, but at the same time he was designing Reboot and all that kind of stuff. It was amazing.
Yeah, and there was photographs of him on the Conehead set, and there was he did seem pretty glamorous. Yeah.
But so what's your working day like just now then? Because there's two things I always loved, right? It's like there's a book about this just now as well, where you see what somebody's studio looks like, which I really love that. I love how we look around and see what's up in the walls and what they've got on their shelves and everything, And the other thing I love is the structure of your day. Like I remember hearing that Stephen King worked a 4-hour day, but he worked every day. He even worked on Christmas Day, like just 4 hours, 7 days a week. And that's really fascinating to be so productive, but just do 4 hours, But what's your day then? Like, can you run through
it? I typically get up between 7 and 8 and have a shower, start working. Some days I'll make the breakfast for everybody before I start, because my eldest son, Vin, he works with me some of the time. He obviously helped colour the Ambassadors book. My middle one, Joe, he's in his final year doing maths at Glasgow Uni, but he does it all from home. And up until recently, our daughter Orla was she was still at home, but she's now away to Dundee because she's at art school up there. But so I would make breakfast for everybody, and I would work, and depending on what the deadline was like, like I would stop and I'd do a bit of the crossword, and or I'd go out and do a food shop. I love food shopping. Love going to delis and stuff like that. And I usually stop about 4:30 because Anne Jane works till 5, and so I'll start making the dinner that time. And because for years I always liked to cook, and for 30 years I only ever made fried breakfasts on the weekend. And now that I work from home and the deadlines are easier, I do nearly all the cooking, which is great because Anne Jane hates cooking, loves eating but hates cooking. So
it's good you've got that balance, isn't it? You can do the cooking, she can do the eating.
So yeah, I mean and also I don't generally work after dinner, and I don't generally work on weekends either. So the last few years, basically since the Jupiter's Legacy deal, the last few years have been just a totally different kind of schedule for me.
Easier.
And it's also allowed me to do other things outside of comics. Because it's that great thing about because I could never afford to stop working. That's why I worked so many hours.
Yeah.
And then to be in the position where you can actually take your foot off the gas and say, well, what would I actually like to do next? and having the opportunity to do things outside of comics has actually been a really nice change of pace.
Yeah. What's the world like outside of comics? You know, like, I know you're doing commercial art and things like that. Does it, because you build up your reputation in comics and everybody knows who you are and so on, but does that carry over into the commercial art world? Are they aware that you're like one of the best there is? Or is it a different thing?
It carries over somewhat because of the internet. I mean, what happened with me is the BBC made that documentary about me, and the next week, at the next Glasgow Museum's meeting, the first point of the order was, does anybody know the comic book artist from this city that, you know, like was on the TV last week? And Martin Craig, a curator from GOMA, Gallery of Modern Art, he was like, yeah, I know him. He was in a show that I did a few years back. And that documentary led to the big show in Kelvin Grove Art Gallery and Museum. And that show in the museum led to a designer called Jim Hamilton, not our Jim Hamilton from Forbidden Planet, but Jim Hamilton, the Glasgow designer. He was doing the Radisson Red Hotel down in Finniston. Yeah. And because of the show in Kelvin Grove, he got me to do the hotel, all the drawings for the walls in the hotel. And then a guy from Bowmore Whiskey was staying in the hotel and saw the drawings and got in touch, and that's what led on to doing the job I'm doing just now for the whiskey company. So
that's amazing. I didn't realize one had fed into the other like that.
Yeah, it's literally just been one thing after another. It's always, each one has come off the last kind of job. So
it's funny because people, especially people in America or Europe or whatever, listen to this. Like Kelvin Grove Galleries, where your exhibition was, is literally like the most amazing gallery in Scotland, isn't it? I mean, it's magnificent. It's this incredible.
It's the second most popular gallery in the UK.
Yes, it's
got the biggest civic art collection of any city in Europe.
And how long did your exhibition run for there? I mean, it was
6 months.
Because I used to pass it every day on the way to nursery, dropping the kids off at nursery. You know.
Did you ever go in?
No, it was too expensive. I didn't. I went in a few times actually, and it was a brilliant exhibition. And seeing your stuff blown up that size and all that, it was like such a big deal. And then I didn't realize quite what you'd done with the Radisson Red Hotel, and I just popped my head in to see how it was all looking. And you know, it was your artwork on every floor, blown up to the size of a room and everything. You know, so I mean, people who are visiting Glasgow can actually go and see this. If you're a comic fan, you can go into the Radisson Red, can't you, and go and check out your art on the walls.
You can indeed. Please do.
What's the Bowmore Whiskey thing? What is it exactly you're doing with it?
Bowmore is a distillery on Islay, a wee island off the west coast, and they make really kind of world-class whiskies, and there's a fairly rich tradition of myths and legends from the island, and they had this idea that it would be nice to retell some of those stories with the myth printed in the back of the box, with the artwork on all four sides of the box, so that when you turn it in your hands, you can actually read almost like panel at a time, like a comic, although it's one image. You can reread the story. But also, the master blender has he's selected and finished whiskies so the tasting notes match the narrative. Right. So like the first one was the devil in the round church. And when you smell the whiskey before you taste it, it smells like a dusty old wooden church. And then when you taste it, you get a wee bit of it's a bit like altar wine. It's actually from a sherry cask. And eventually the last note is a saltiness, and the devil escapes in a cask in the sea. But it's totally amazing the way that the master blender Ron Welsh has managed to actually kind of match the kind of the tasting notes up with the narrative. It's pretty amazing. And these guys are so enthusiastic to work for. They love everything I do. I'm really delighted to be associated with this particular brand. And the only downside is that for most people is that it's actually quite difficult to get the whiskies because they're only on sale in prestige airports, like Dubai and Shanghai and places like that. So, and they cost a few £1,000 each.
That high-end whiskey market blows my mind. I had no idea of that world until we did Kingsman, because there was the Kingsman whiskey and there was the American Statesman bourbon and everything as well. And Matthew Vaughan gave me a drink. He gave me a sip of this 20 grand bottle, like before, when it was all just been set up. I said, I'm not into whiskey. I don't really like it. He says, try this. And it was like the most amazing thing I've ever tasted in my life. And I don't even think I got a free bottle, but it was like 20 grand a bottle or something. But at that high end, it's delicious.
Yeah.
It's so good.
Yeah, I mean, I've tasted a few very expensive rare whiskies, and they are just such a different thing. It's like that Willy Wonka thing where you just keep getting new flavors all the time, even after you've swallowed it, just as it changes on your tongue as time passes. Same with wine. I've actually had through somebody else's generosity, I've actually had some really exceptional wines, and
never at my house. It's always about a tenner.
Not in your house, no. It's always El Dorado or Buckfast in your house. But yeah, when you get things at that kind of level, it's pretty amazing.
Do you know what's funny? I've known you close to 30 years now, probably. And I remember the first time we met, you were kicking about with Rob McCallum, and it was at one of the comic conventions in Glasgow. When UCAC, the UK Comic Art Convention, was slightly sliding, it was just sort of going away a little bit, and they were just doing Glasgow conventions. I think at that point they'd stopped doing the London ones, which were amazing. And I remember you and Rob kicking about, and you were like this new guy, and you had a style unlike anybody's. I always remember seeing your stuff for the first time, because normally you see somebody's art and you think, oh yeah, he's a kind of Brian Boland imitator, or he's a Mick McMahon imitator. All the British guys had a kind of style, or they were copying Brendan or whatever. And you were this thing I'd never really seen before, and you were just starting to get work on the magazine. I think you'd maybe just had Missionary Man or Shinobi or whatever around about that time, And you and Rob was quite a similar style, didn't you? You and Rob were sort of both coming in from the same a little bit. But do you know what I never knew? Did you come in via John McShane? Because although we've known each other so well for so long, I'm not quite sure how you first saw print. Was John McShane, who owned Aka Books and Comics, which is the legendary Glasgow comic shop? All stories kind of go to John, really, But was John the guy who introduced you to 2000 AD and everything, or how did it all happen?
I'll get to John McShane in a minute. The way it happened was I started working for Electric Soup, which was an underground Viz knockoff in Glasgow. So it was Tommy Somerville and Dave Alexander were the two that really started that. And Rob McCallum was one of the other artists. And Rob, over a period of a couple of months, he introduced me to Frank Millar, Jeff Darrow, Dave Gibbons, Mike Mignola, Katsuhiro Otomo, Mobius, Brendan McCarthy, Mick McMahon, just everybody that he thought was good.
Yeah.
And so that was my kind of Electric Soup was my first in, although it was just an indie comic. That was my first seeing print, and Rob McCallum was the guy that really kind of showed me the most stuff in a short space of time. But where we were having the Electric Soup meetings was a couple of doors down from AKA Comics. And so I used to go into John's shop and I would be like, I've only got £4. What's good? And he would go around, and obviously anybody that wrote or drew comics, no matter how bad they were, John would give them a staff discount, and he would let them use a photocopier for free, and yeah, I mean, John was kind of instrumental in creating that sense of community amongst all the different kind of Glasgow artists and writers in the comic field, at least. And but it was a really exciting time when I was starting out, because Gary Erskine was doing either an X book or a Wolverine book. I think it was a Wolverine miniseries he was doing. And Colin McNeil, who had been doing America for the magazine, he was doing a 2-part Legends of the Dark Knight. And obviously there was Alan Grant, who used to pop up on a regular basis and was like, he was doing Shadow the Bat and Lobo at the time. And then there was loads of us who were kind of getting into the magazine at the same time. Like, you and Grant were a wee bit ahead of us in 2000 AD. So it was just, there was, it seemed like there was a really strong local scene, and there was a friendly kind of competition there as well. I mean, people were genuinely enthusiastic to show off their work and to see what other people had been doing, and I think like when we were all working in Electric Soup, there was definitely that feeling. Like Dave Alexander in particular, he was the guy that did the McBam Brothers, which was kind of like the Fabulous Furry Freak Brothers, and Dave was really at another level, and like that was one of the things that really pushed me on, But it was an exciting time.
And that scene, it's funny. I always think about this, that whenever something happens, there's always a sort of reaction. Like when the Beatles hit, all these English bands from that part of the world just suddenly all exploded at the same time, way more than there would have been if the Beatles had never happened. And kind of like Alan Moore crack in America in 1982, 83, created that British explosion. And then Grant breaking in 87 with Animal Man and all that kind of stuff. That kind of inspired a lot of Scottish guys, didn't it? To think, well, that's not impossible. It's like the laws of probability changed. Like this has gone from no chance to we actually have a chance of working for DC Comics and everything, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
So that Glasgow scene was huge, wasn't it? I mean, remember Scam? Like there was Scottish comic.
Scottish cartoonists and comic artists members.
I thought it was Scottish Catholic. I wasn't sure.
It certainly wasn't though.
and we used to all meet once a month or something, didn't we? And there must have been like 50 or 60 people in that, wasn't there? There was
aye.
In the pub we would meet once a month, and we'd be in that basement bar. It was brilliant, wasn't it?
And Cam Kennedy would occasionally be there, and Wagner and Grant would occasionally be there, and Will Eisner was over at least once.
Really? John? That must have been John McShane, because McShane was a friend of Eisner and his wife Anne as well.
Yeah, Will had family in Ireland.
All right.
So, and John was in contact with Will. Yeah. And so the club managed to get Will to come to the club, and we only had to pay for flights from Dublin to Glasgow.
Right. That's amazing.
For a couple of days. But because with Will Eisner wearing a "See You, Jimmy Bunnett" with the ginger hair.
I think he had that on anyway when he arrived. I think that was
hiding his baldness.
Do you remember we went to hang out with Eisner for a week in Barcelona? That was amazing.
Yeah, that was amazing. His stories were so good.
I mean, the fact that Eisner turned down Superman. I mean, the fact he was that old was amazing, right? I remember sitting having dinner thinking, you were around before Superman saw print, like before Action Comics #1. And that Siegel and Schuster came to him when he had his publishing house in 1937, and he was like, "Nah, this is never going to work. It's too far fetched."
But the way he told it, he said like they were all doing like crime comics and romance comics and stuff like that, and everybody was sitting drawing. And he said these two kids were really enthusiastic, and they were explaining it, and he was going, "Oh, I can jump as high as a building. Yeah, that's great." And he said, "Sorry, we do." Like war comics and crime comics and all this. And he said, and he wished them all the best of luck and shook their hands. Yeah. And they went out, and as he shut the door, he turned round, and all the guys just put their pens down and just started pissing themselves laughing, going, "Can run faster than a train," And it was amazing the way he was really relishing the fact that they totally took the piss out of these two guys. And then, like, was it 1 year or 2 years later? Like, they were like, "Oh my God, it's the biggest thing in the world."
John's a guy, John McShane is a guy I talk about all the time, because I think if somebody had to destroy the British, or certainly the comic scene in Scotland, they'd have to send a Terminator back and take out John McShane. He's the pivotal figure in so many people's careers. Just even the fact he had a comic shop, when we were all just buying stuff in the newsstand, which was dwindling, and John opened this amazing shop in the city centre. I mean, I spent most of my teen years just hanging about there. And because John was an ex-teacher, he just had that vibe of, he was a kind of magnet and super encouraging, wasn't he? And even any daft idea you had, he would always really encourage you and say, "You should, that's great, type it up and send it in." He was always great for advice. And did you remember him part of John's scene at that very early stage? Yeah.
The first Electric Suit came out in '89, so I started hanging out there in '88.
All right.
So
that far.
And right from the word go, John was just like he was very much like at the centre of that kind of community. But also when remember him and George Jackson set up Fat Man Press, and they published The Bogeyman that Wagner and Grant wrote.
Yeah.
And I remember, on the one hand, I remember thinking this is amazing, because obviously there was all these local people, yourself and Grant and Colin McNeil and Eddie Campbell, and like all doing different types of comics, and then all of us, me and Gordon Rennie and Robbie Morrison and Jim Alexander, and everybody working for the magazine.
Yeah.
And but I remember when they started, they set up their own publishing company to do The Bogeyman, and it wasn't like Electric Suit, which was a kind of like indie rag. It was actually like a proper, like, it was like an American comic that had been printed in Glasgow.
Yeah.
And that was another of the things that kind of made it seem like you could kind of do anything, you know? And then I don't know. I mean, there's just, I think the fact that there was so many people locally were becoming successful, were making a decent living, and were doing kind of big books. I mean, Alan Grant is a case in point. Now, Alan's another one that really pushed to get to help other younger artists and writers, to get into DC comics in particular. I mean, he wrote me a Lobo script, which didn't see the light of day, and then he wrote me that the Scottish Connection, the Batman book.
I saw that Lobo story. Was that never printed?
No.
It looked amazing. It was about 30, 40 pages, wasn't it? There was
it wasn't as much as that. It was 20-something pages.
Why did it never see print? Because I thought that was your first ever American work. What happened?
No.
Did DC just not take it, or what?
No, do you know, Alan asked me what he said, "I'll write you a Lobo script. What kind of story do you want?" And I've been working with Robbie Morrison on Shimura, that kind of Japanese judge for the magazine, and it was all laser knives and hover bikes, and it was just a lot of tech. And I wanted a break from that, so I said, could we have something that was like hand-to-hand combat? And he came up with this really crazy story, but it was called The Hand-to-Hand Job. and it did have a lot of hand-to-hand combat in it, but I think the short version of the story is that DC felt that it kind of sat uncomfortably between a mature readers and a regular book, because it wasn't actually a mature readers, and it ended up getting canned.
So that still exists then? There's a Lobo comic you've drawn, written by Alan Grant, that's never been published?
Yeah.
DC have got to just print this now then? I mean, is it... It could probably run at any time. I'd imagine it's not in any...
Well, it's only penciled. I would really need
I like it.
Sure, okay. Yeah, well, there you go. I suppose that's something DC could do. But,
listen, I'm sure there's going to be some DC guy listening to this, in the toilet. But it's funny because, like I say, your stuff, it didn't really feel like anybody else's. And then somebody pointed out, said, this guy draws like Dudley D. Watkins, and he draws like Winsor McKay and all that. And because you didn't really come from that comic book Marvel tradition as a kid, your influences were outside the normal realm, wasn't it? So like the way Jim Lee and Bill Sienkiewicz and Neil Adams and all that, there's a straight line you can draw between all of those guys. You seem to be coming so from left field, didn't you? So So was that, what were you reading growing up? I mean, what kind of stuff were you picking up before you came in?
The Bruins and Our Willie from the Sunday Post. Like I'm getting the annuals every year at Christmas.
Yeah.
So that's Dudley D. Watkins, and it's for Americans that don't know his work. He's kind of like Winsor Mackay. But there was also John Buscema, Conan was an influence.
When were you reading that? I didn't know you read that stuff.
That would be between maybe about 10 and 15.
All right. So way back.
Mad Magazine was a huge influence, particularly Mort Drucker and Jack Davis.
Yeah.
I loved when I was down in Millport, and we went down like 4 times a year for family holidays. There was a cafe with a spinner rack, and I would pick up Conan's there and maybe a Daredevil or whatever. But they sold those kind of black and white anthology reprints of like Sinister Tales and Creepy Worlds and all that kind of stuff, Weird Science. And I didn't know it at the time, but there was stories in there by Kirby and Ditko and a whole bunch of Toth, and so there was a lot of that kind of black and white short stories with a twist in the tail, which I loved. But I also, I had a few European comics. By the time I was doing Electric Suit, obviously I got this re-education, this kind of like really concentrated kind of crash course. So yeah, I know obviously I had lots of influences from like album covers and graphic designers and from fine artists, like I studied drawing and painting at Glasgow School of Art, but even before that, I used to actually buy like coffee table books on the Renaissance and the pre-Raphaelites and the Impressionists and pop art and all the rest of it, just because I just loved all that stuff. So
that's what makes it so hard to copy, isn't it? It's funny because normally somebody comes along and is a big artist, is number one, and then they get 100 imitators. Like the Image style was very easy to copy for kids, but yours is like, it's got 1 billion influences outside the normal sphere, and it looks really difficult, doesn't it? So there's only a handful of guys who've given it a try, to be the new Quietly.
Well, I'll leave that for you to decide.
It looks like it takes a while, though, doesn't it? It's not.
It does.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot more time spent on the working out how to actually tell the story. I spend much more time working on the storytelling than I do on the actual drawings themselves.
It's funny, because your formal art education was relatively short, wasn't it? How long were you at Glasgow School of Art? Were you there?
2 years.
Oh, did you do the full 2 years?
Well, it's a 4-year course.
Oh no, so... I didn't know you'd stayed that long. I didn't know you'd done.
Yeah. I didn't get chucked out until the end of second year. So.
I thought you left of your own accord. Did you get chucked out?
No, they failed me. They failed me because I didn't do enough work. And getting near the end of the year, I actually knew I was in trouble because I looked around and everybody else had like a fairly decent body of work, and I had very, very little. It's just I was going out at least 5 nights a week. I would swan into art school in the morning, go straight to the refectory and smoke French cigarettes and eat croissants, and like maybe do a couple of hours in the afternoon before getting ready to go out that night. It was like laughable, how seriously I didn't take it.
That's what being 20 should be, though, isn't it?
And back then, you got a grant. It wasn't a student loan, so I didn't even need to pay any of that money back. But money well spent, as you can see. But it was an absolute dream to get to Glasgow School of Art, and I loved being there. I really loved it. So many people I know went to Glasgow School of Art and actually hated it, or speak very badly about it now. And I like a couple of the best years of my life there. But when they failed me, I thought this is them giving me a really severe warning, and I did a resubmission over the summer months, and the resubmission I thought was like easily good enough to get back in, and I'm just like, no. And I was absolutely gutted. It was literally the best chance I'd ever had in my life, and I'd squandered it.
Was it the first time something, everybody has a first time something doesn't work out? Was that like the shock, that this didn't go as planned?
It was the first time something really major hadn't worked out, and it was totally my fault, and I couldn't blame anybody else. And the one thing I learned from it was that it was the last time I ever missed out on something by not trying. I've missed out on lots of good jobs because I'd already committed to something else when a better offer came along, and I felt obliged to do the thing I'd already agreed to. I've lost out on some things simply because somebody else was chosen over me because they suited the project better or whatever. But I've never missed anything from actually just not trying.
It's funny, Matthew Vaughan said to me one time, it was such a wise thing. He can be quite wise, Matthew, and he said, to be successful, you have to be ready to take advantage of unusual opportunities. He said, because occasionally, 2 or 3 times in your life, something lands in your lap, and you've got to be ready and make it really work. And I guess that's a perfect example, isn't it? Like getting into art school, you cannot drop the ball.
Yeah.
But at the same time, that if this was a Hollywood movie, you doing the Kelvin Grove exhibition would be the happy ending, wouldn't it? Because there's something lovely about dropping out and then coming back bigger than you could ever have imagined.
Oh, I mean, like they do get me to do talks and stuff to the students every now and again, So I mean, it's all is forgiven.
Do you ever bring it up that you left when you're doing the talks? Do you ever drop that in?
It's been mentioned, yeah, yeah, and not with any nastiness,
Yeah. But it's funny because you always strike me as a guy who's not that ambitious. Like you're quite a laid back personality type, So I think you just draw because you like doing it. You'll choose a project that you enjoy as opposed to thinking, I should really draw X-Force for 24 issues or something like that. Like you follow your kind of heart, I think, on things, But your rise was really pretty meteoric, wasn't it? When you think about it, you went from doing almost small press in Scotland to Batman really fast, wasn't it? So was that Alan Grant? Was he the catalyst that took you?
It was a few years. Yeah, I mean, I did the Electric Suit for about 3 years, but it was very part-time. I was doing lots of other things at the time. And then it was actually Alan Grant helped me get into the magazine as well, because he showed my photocopies, my kind of my submission thing to Steve McManus first and then David Bishop. And so that's what got me work in the magazine. And then a few years down the line, I worked for the magazine for probably about 3 years or something. And so early to mid 90s. And then I started working for Paradox Press first in DC Comics and then Vertigo. And when eventually he wrote the Lobo story for me, he had been trying for a couple of years at that point to get me to do a Batman. He didn't tell me this, but his editors were just like, this guy's absolutely not a superhero artist.
Right.
He's a Vertigo artist. That's where he's suited. And Alan actually, I think he said it was about 2 or 3 years of pestering them before they eventually reneged and said, right, okay.
And was that the Batman book then? The Scottish Connection?
Yeah.
And how did that go down with the DC guys? It looked so amazing. Did it blow them away when they saw it? Or?
Everybody liked it, but the thing was, everybody liked it apart from Alan Grant and my mum. And
Alan Grant didn't like it?
No, what happened was, like, Alan gave me the script and didn't tell me that it was like the 4th, 5th, 6th rewrite, because he was totally fed up with it. Right. He just gave me the script and let me get on with it. And when it came out, I gave it to my mum to read.
Yeah.
And so the next time I saw her, I said, "What did you think of the Scottish Connection?" She said, your drawings were really very good. She said, but the story was rubbish. So of course, straight away I got onto the phone to Alan and said, my mum said that your story was rubbish. And he said, you tell your mum she's right. He said it used to be a good story. And he said I was really, really pleased with the first draft of the script.
Yeah.
But what it was is he'd been reading a book about he'd read several books about the Freemasons and this theory that the Freemasons came out of the Knights Templar and it was tied in with Rosslyn Chapel before the Dan Brown thing.
Yeah.
And he wrote this story where Bruce Wayne goes to Scotland to reinter the remains of some ancestor. Mm-hmm. And while he's there, he notices corners of the gravestones are missing. Mm-hmm. And by taking rubbings of the other corners and putting them together, he works out that this is a map of Rosslyn Chapel, and it's a conspiracy thing. And he basically solves the mystery like a detective in his holiday clothes.
Yeah.
So he didn't take the batsuit with him. And so it was basically a Bruce Wayne solving a mystery in Scotland.
Yeah.
And the Bat editors were just like, this is rubbish. This is no Batman story.
Yeah. Make
him take his costume with him. So that was the first thing. And then it was like, we need a bad guy. So then he had to come up with this guy with a plague mask. And then they were like, they need to have a fight. He needs to like beat him in a fight. And it just went on like that. And Alan had to rewrite the story 4 or 5 times at least. And he said by the time he was finished with it, he just hated it. But he couldn't tell me that because he wanted me to be full of enthusiasm for it. So, but I liked it. So
if you hadn't drawn the Batman suit, that would have been so disappointing, though, wouldn't it? If you'd just drawn Bruce Wayne in a business suit, it wouldn't have been the same, wouldn't it? Those original art pages. Good luck selling those Bruce Wayne pages.
Well, I've got one full issue of All Star Superman. That's the one where Clark Kent goes and visits Lex Luthor in prison, and he doesn't put the suit on once, so there's no Superman in it.
All right.
And at the time, even I sold most of All Star Superman as it was coming out, just because the dollar rate was really terrible back then. This was 2006, 2007, maybe 2008, but the dollar rate was really bad, the exchange rate, and I couldn't keep up the payments in the house, so I actually had to just sell all the pages as I was doing them. And I actually thought these pages don't have Superman on them, so they'll be worth nothing. So I actually kept the full issue. And but for the same reason, it's just nobody wants that kind of stuff. I mean, they probably want it now. But
have you got it now? Have you still got the issue?
Yeah, I've still got it.
The nice thing is you can charge 10 times that probably now, wouldn't you? Enough time has passed. So, and there's those guys who are crazy rich who just come in and buy a complete issue, don't they? That makes it like
Chip Kidd. Chip Kidd's got a complete issue of that and a complete issue of Batman and Robin. He's got them in a big glass book.
Amazing. Jonathan Ross has got the best original art collection I've ever seen, comic art collection. He's got like entire issues of Fantastic Four, complete issues of Fantastic Four Kirby art from the 60s. Amazing.
Paul Gambaccini's got a full set of EC comics. A full set. I think there's only like 6 or 10 people in the world who've got a full set. And half of them are Bill Gaines's family members,
Because in the 70s, these things probably cost pennies. I mean, they didn't really start janking up in price till the 80s, I think, didn't they? They weren't too bad.
Paul Gambaccini, I think, had to remortgage his house to buy them, but they'll be worth so much now. But he didn't trust, when he had a loft apartment in New York and a place in the GLC building in London.
Yeah.
And he moved them over box at a time every time he flew between the two, and he would just sit the box on his knee because he didn't trust couriers, or they say he certainly wouldn't trust getting them thrown into the hold. But
it's funny. It's weird. Like comic book art is one of those things that sort of always goes up in value. Like comic books as well. They never really go down. I think there was 1 year or something where they went down in value, so people always saw them as a good investment. But one of my pals said, "Will they age out?" And he was talking about Elvis memorabilia, and he said that because all the Elvis fans are dying now, Elvis memorabilia over the last 20 years has been slowly dipping in price. Like, do you think EC comics will lose their value, their resonance culturally, as people who grew up hearing about that stuff just start to disappear? Do you think that'll happen with comic art, or do you think it's just the scarcity makes it always valuable?
I don't know. I think with EC comics, that's a tricky one, because I mean, like in the fine art world, like the fact that things become older and the people who originally liked them die off doesn't actually affect the value.
Yeah.
But maybe EC Comics have got more in common with Elvis memorabilia than fine art. So maybe there is something to that. But at the moment, what I'm noticing is that original comic art, generally speaking, is becoming more valuable. I mean, I've seen prices online for some pages of my work, and they're really crazy prices. I mean, like 10 times what I sold them for, you know?
Well, people say that about Ditko, that Ditko was always a bit annoyed that these Spider-Man pages were going for 100 grand while he was alive, you know, and, you know, he didn't get anything for them, I think. Probably, I think Marvel hung on to them and flogged them, but they were eventually changing hands for 80, 90, 100 grand a pop. It's crazy.
Yeah, well, mine aren't up there yet, but I saw a double page spread from PAX a couple of months ago for 18,000. And PAX Americana isn't like, it's not a well-known book of mine like New X-Men or you know, Authority or Jupiter's Legacy, or, you know, it's not something that was, I don't think it's something that everybody knows that well, but I mean, that surprised me. But Dave Gibbons always says, like, every time there's a page of Watchmen changes hands and makes like the news, he'll get friends or family members phoning up and saying, "Hey Dave, great news, you know, page of your Watchmen just went for, you know, whatever amount," and it's like, and he sold them all for, I don't know, 50 or 100 quid a page or something like that. Back when it was just when they were coming out, because he just thought these are just made up characters based on quite old obscure characters, and there's a lot of talking heads, and, you know, nobody's going to want them.
You know, Johnny Romita keeps everything. Like he has sold virtually no pages his entire career.
Really?
Yeah, he's got like, there's not one page of Kick-Ass that was ever sold, for example. He's got the entire run, all 3 volumes, you know. He's got them all in the house, and like his plan is 50 years in the future, some grandchild makes a fortune out of them. I would just spend the money now.
50 years in the future, Johnny will maybe look about 60.
I know that's true. Johnny will outlive his grandchildren, won't he? It's like Kirk Douglas.
Yeah. No, he'll start selling the pages for cosmetic procedures, won't he?
Do you see your career a bit like pre-Authority and post-Authority? Because I know for me, that's when I used to I was on very modest rates and nobody was really looking at what I was doing. And then suddenly Authority happened and everything changed. It was like a J.K. Rowling moment, you know. Like I remember it being March 2020, March 2000. Sorry, my life completely changed. Like, did you have that feeling, or was it already happening?
I mean, my career has kind of been lots of stepping stones, but that was a jump when the Authority happened. I think part of it was the first time I'd been in a monthly book.
Yeah.
Part of it was the fact that it was a book that had a cult following, but was kind of under the radar slightly. Sales really started going up when we took over. Joe Quesada and Bill Jamis loved it, and wanted us to go over to Marvel after it. So yeah, I mean, there was it was a very significant stepping stone for me, and certainly things that, one of the things that changed just on a practical level was Joe Quesada wanted us to go over there and said, "How much do you want per page? How much do you need?" Because remember, we were thinking of moving to the States.
I do. That's hilarious.
And then once I'd been at Marvel for a while, when I went back to DC, like, I mean, I was doing the X-Men, so like they had to kind of like make me a decent page rate, you know, like to go back to DC, you know. So these kind of things, you know, like if you're fortunate enough, you know, like these things do kind of build one on each other. But the Authority was certainly a kind of springboard or something.
I was suddenly aware that people were reading, like everybody was reading something, because you would see people influenced by it. You know, Warren and Bryan had done the most amazing 12 issues. I mean, we would never have been able to do it without the amazing launch that they gave the book. And just as it was getting hot, they left, which was crazy, you know. And we capitalized, I think, on the fact that everybody was suddenly looking at this book. And then we sort of took it up to 11 a bit, you know, just by going totally nuts with it. And it started getting a lot of mainstream attention and so on. But it was so exciting for me because it was the first book I was working on where the sales were going up, and it didn't feel like it was going to get cancelled. You know, everything at that time, it was terrible, worse than the industry I think had ever been, you know, like, and everything was sliding, and this was this little sort of glimmer of hope. And it was really nice, wasn't it? Because remember, we suddenly started getting, you know, although DC sort of hated the book because they hated how irreverent it was, and it was the most conservative regime that was running DC at the time. They hated what we were doing, but at the same time, we're kind of intrigued by the idea that, you know, we could maybe come and make another book work. And they made us that amazing offer. Remember, they flew us out to San Diego, not for the convention, just to hang out for a week and to come on staff. And you and I, for some, I don't even know why this happened. You and I were going to move our families to California. We were going to live in San Diego. I can't even remember why that happened. Like, why did we? I remember we spent a week there. We were in the offices every day. We were looking at houses. How did that even come about? I genuinely have no memory of this.
I don't know. I think we were talking about the fact that even though at the time we were both, I think, on the highest page rates we'd been up to that point, it was still a bit of a struggle once you changed the dollar check into pounds and paid your tax, and everything was quite expensive in the UK. It was kind of like, it was very much like a really ordinary job. It was a struggle, like having a family. And I think we both, without doing very much research, I think we both felt like we would have a better standard of living over there. And it was really exciting, especially when they invited to get us out there and show us some houses. And I remember they set us up with a realtor, and she drove us around, and we went and saw all these amazing, it's like the Real Housewives of Orange County or something. We went to all these amazing houses, and we're like, how much is this? And all of it was like 5 times what we were making in a month. And so I don't know, I suppose. I mean, do you know that the first alarm bell should have been, they flew us over there, but instead of putting us up in a hotel, they put us up in John Lehman's couch.
That was a sign we weren't going to get paid that much, wasn't it? They weren't even springing for the hotel. We were on John Lehman's sofa bed.
The fact that our editor was living in a small apartment and putting us up in his couch, right? You know, like should have told us everything we needed to know. But it just became apparent that it wasn't going to pan out.
Do you know what I do remember though on that same trip? Because it was it Christmas time? Because Jim Lee had a big party, didn't it? It was Jim Lee's Christmas party, and Jim obviously ran Wildstorm at the time.
And he got gaming tables in, and croupiers and cocktail staff and everything.
He essentially turned his house into a Bond set. It looked like Casino Royale, didn't it? He had
remember all the
tables everywhere.
Remember all the dollar bills that had Jim's face in the middle?
Well, do you know what was funny? I thought they were like real money, you know, because it was to bet on the tables, and I was like, "We've just been given $200. This is hang on to it. Don't waste any on these tables." You know?
Yeah.
You know what I remember that night? Jim had a relative there. It was an old lady. She was like super old, and she was wearing this outfit. I don't know if you remember this, but she looked exactly like Obi-Wan Kenobi. Like she was dressed like Obi-Wan Kenobi. It had a hood. It was a long brown robe with a hood and kind of a beige dress. And it was too funny, but I couldn't tell you because I knew that if I told you at the party, it would become the joke of the party. And I had to keep it till we got back to Lehman's house that night. And you said, "Why didn't you tell me?" And I said, "Because it had been all around the room. I had to wait till we got back home." But I always loved that. She was like an 8-year-old woman dressed as Ben Kenobi accidentally. It was fantastic.
Do you know, I've got no memory of her. It was a great party. I remember various things about the party, but I don't remember Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Whose girlfriend was it was vomiting on Jim Lee's tennis court? I always remember that. She was like really heaving up. She was a lovely girl. I remember talking to her for a wee while. And then she went out. She was just vomiting over Jim's tennis court. Do you remember that? No? The blonde girl?
No, I don't remember that either. I'm just glad it wasn't me that was vomiting this time. No, I don't remember that. I remember there were a few casualties.
Yeah, that was a great night.
I feel like we behaved reasonably well by our standards.
I don't think we behaved that well. I don't think we behaved that well. Because you know what I always remember? There's somebody said to me, "Oh, it's a shame you weren't here last year. Jim flew everybody to Vegas." And I was like, "What?" So the whole Wildstorm studio get put in a private jet and taken to Vegas, and Jim took everybody to a casino for the night. So, I mean, comics just seemed super exciting, didn't they? As we were coming from the British scene into this glamorous American scene, it just seemed awesome, didn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Remember, Jim took us all out. It was one of the San Diegos, and Jim took us. I think there was maybe 11 or 12 of us, and he took us all. Chris Weston was there, and he took us all out to his favorite seafood restaurant in La Jolla.
Oh yes, because I don't eat.
And he asked for the tequila menu.
Yeah,
and he just kept ordering bottles of tequila, and every bottle was to get put into like 11 or 12 glasses. So many of us were at the table, and we just to shoot them. And at the end of the meal, there was people underneath the table. There was people lying outside unconscious. It was just carnage. And he left them some giant tip. It did seem very glamorous. But,
I remember being at a convention with Jim a couple of years after that. I bumped into him and he says, "Hey, listen, do you want to come to a poker game I'm having?" And Jim would always have a big high stakes poker game at any show he was at. And it was always invite only, maybe 10 guys or something hanging around up in his suite. And I said, "No, I'm wrecked. I need to go back and be sick in my hotel room," kind of thing, you know. And then this girl came up to me with this huge guy, right? This big guy who looked like Chewbacca, you know, with this girl. And she said, "Listen, can you get me into this poker game in Jim Lee's room?" And I was like, I'm heading home. And she took out like a gambling chip and started flipping it around her fingers, you know, like a special effects kind of thing. And she said, "If you get me in there, I'll go 50-50 in what I take from those guys." And I was like, "Oh my God, I'm going to get killed here. I need to get out of here," you know. And I always wonder if that woman ever found her way into Jim's party. I'll have to ask if somebody came in.
Ask Jim. Yeah.
But it's funny to think is that when we had that little sliding doors moment where DC flew us out there, and I think if I remember rightly, you were on very, very modest rates. You were on about $280 a page or something, and you were trying
something
to get
like that.
$290 or something, you know, super modest. And DC was like, "Whoa, you know, I don't think we can afford that $10 kind of thing." And then Marvel, I remember, just come in with 400s right away, you know, and you were like, okay, because Joe Quesada had just taken over Marvel at that time, and he was so clever. I mean, you realize Joe's a genius. He's a General Patton, you know. He said, "Why don't you guys on the way back have a stopover in New York, and I'll take you guys out to dinner," you know. And by the time we went home, we were signed up at Marvel, weren't we?
Yeah, but yeah, I mean that was it. It was I wasn't asking for much more. It was just I was really struggling to keep things together, like financially here, and one of the clinchers was for me was that they got Chris Weston in to do a couple of fill-in issues.
Yeah,
and I love Chris Weston. I mean, I love him as a person, but I'm a big fan of his work.
Yeah,
but I just didn't want any fill-ins because it didn't make sense when you've got 12 issues of Warren and Brian. For the first year, and then 12 issues of Me and You for the second year. Like, so what if it takes 14 months instead of 12 months? But so I don't know. There was various reasons that I left when I did, but obviously Joe was just waiting in the wings, saying, you know, like, how much do you actually need, you know, like, for things to run smoothly at home.
But it's strange to think, though, if you hadn't gone over, I wouldn't have gone over. And if I hadn't gone over, like Grant was still working at DC and everything at the time, you know, and that began a little snowball effect, didn't it, over towards Marvel? And it's like that, you know, for want of a nail, the kingdom was lost. If they'd found that $10 a page and actually paid you a little bit more, I think history would have been completely different.
Yeah, because remember, you and Grant were thinking of having an imprint at Wildstorm, and the basic premise of that would be that you two would write whatever kind of stories you wanted to write, and it would be all your favorite artists that would work with you. And as you say, for want of a nail, I mean, the whole thing fell apart. I remember like you and Grant made up some funny names for books, like phony names. because Wildstorm kept saying, "Just tell us some of the ideas you've got," and one of them was sex kites. I remember that. There was 4 titles you come up with, and I can't remember the other 3, but the one that sticks with me was Sex Kites. And there was no idea behind it. It was just a funny name. And you were like, oh, really?
And because we were riding high at Wildstorm, they would just say, that sounds fantastic. Any nonsense we were saying, that's right. Because we were just killing time trying to wait for a good deal. But, you know, it was also a fun time, wasn't it? As much as it was stressful because DC really didn't want to be publishing The Authority while we were doing it. But at the same time, we had great support within Wildstorm itself, didn't we?
Absolutely.
Scott Dunbar was great. John Nee was great. John Lehman was fantastic. I mean, those guys were brilliant. And do you know what I always remember about that time is just the mads. It was just all madness, wasn't it? We always had a good time. And not pranks, like always playing pranks and everything. You know, like, do you remember when we figured out that you could do fake Hotmail accounts and fire it? So we'd do stuff around the other pros.
You did that to me. You sent me an email from a fake Hotmail account, and it was about doing a piece of artwork for some sob story charity, and it was like the most elaborate. It was something that would have taken me months. And you're like, please, you know, like, this guy's not got long to go in it. And I thought there was something about the tone of it. It was so pushy and so cheeky. I thought, this must be Mark.
Do you know what?
And I ended up phoning you up, and it was.
There's one guy, I won't name names, but there was one guy I got around that time, because I remember Lehman cackling about this. And it was one guy who was really famously greedy, right? He would always only do big money jobs. He was a writer. And I contacted him and pretended to be from the Ku Klux Klan, right? So I was saying that, listen, you know, we're trying to reinvent ourselves, and we want to do a line of comic books and just try and show that we're no longer that old-fashioned racist organization and everything. And I got this guy to agree. He was like, yeah, that's it. It was for $250 a page or something. He was like, yeah, I'm up for that, you know. So, and there was the X-Men artist I got in touch with, and I said, listen, I pretended to be from a cigarette brand, and I said, listen, if you can sneak our cigarettes into every issue of X-Men where you have Cyclops smoking them, Storm smoking them and everything, we'll give you $50 a month, you know, if you can put this into X-Men every month, if all the heroes are smoking our cigarettes. And the guy was appalled. He was like so angry. And I said, I don't think you heard me. I said $50 a month. That's over $1,000 a year we'll pay you, you know. And it was great. I've got millions of these. Do you remember? It was just like sport at the beginning.
Yeah. I remember when we were in Auckland, and we'd been in a night out with the other guests. And we went back to our rooms. And when I opened my room door, there was a note on the floor.
Yeah.
And I picked it up, and it was from one of the actresses. I can't remember her name. She was in Beastmasters.
Right.
She was beautiful. She was like 6'2" or something, like a big model.
Yeah.
And it just said, "Hey Frank, really love your Scottish accent. Fancy coming to my room for a nightcap?" And apart from the fact that, like, she was like a catwalk model and I was like middle-aged but Pot Bailey, I thought this is not a chance. But the mistake you made was you gave her room number, and it was something like, you know, like 1208 or something like that, but there was only 10 floors in the hotel, and I just went along and knocked your door and held the note up.
The best thing is she wasn't even staying in the hotel. She'd actually just shown up for a couple hours that afternoon, you know, so. But I think I always remember as well as ripping some Jim Lee original artwork. Do you remember that? We were having a fight in Jim Lee's office or something, and we were
No.
Was
it was a signing in San Diego at San Diego Comic Con, and we were doing The Authority.
Yeah,
and we had pretty big lines, and Jim was sitting. So I was sitting here, you were sitting to my right, and Jim was to your right.
Yeah.
And Jim had this huge line, and he had a folio case with artwork in it. And because you'd finished the signing, we got to the end of our line, but there was a few guys wanting sketches, so I was still busy, and you were kind of sitting chatting to the fans. But basically, you were kind of twiddling your thumbs. You'd signed everything you needed to sign, and you said to Jim, if you anything interested in there, and he said, yeah, but he said, you're welcome to look at it, but it's really top secret. Don't let anybody see it.
Yeah.
And you opened it up and you were like, "Oh my god, that's amazing!" And it was when Stan Lee had, remember that crossover thing.
Oh, just imagine when Stan Lee was imagining the DC heroes.
Yeah. And Stan had come up with a design for Wonder Woman, and Jim had done the drawings for it. And there was this amazing, brilliantly finished, inked piece of artwork with Wonder Woman wearing the Stan Lee designed outfit, with the helmet and the gauntlets and the lasso and all the things down either side. And you were looking at it and you said, "Vin, you need to see this. It's totally amazing." And you handed it to me and you said, "But don't let anybody else see it." And it was a zip folio case, and I was holding the back of it. And when I opened it, the piece of artwork was in a pocket at the front, but I had my thumb on it, not on the other side. So when I opened it, it tore in half. And I remember when you said, "Don't let MD see it," I kind of went dun 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 dun, and I opened it. It was a big, and everybody at the front of our queue, like their eyes just popped, and the two of us started laughing nervously. And you were saying, in fact, you couldn't have seen it by that time because you were saying, don't worry, it's probably just a photocopy." And I could see in the back of it the Sharpie for the spotted blacks shining through, and I was like, "No, it's an original." You went, "Oh, don't worry, it's probably a rough sketch." And I looked at it, and it was this really amazing drawing. And then at the bottom, it said, "For Mike Carlin, best wishes, Jim Lee." So that's a disaster. But you were laughing so much. I was like, I need to tell him and I need to apologise for this. And I actually had to send you away because I was so nervous it was making me laugh as well. And you couldn't stop laughing. And I actually had to wait till you went away. And then I said, "Listen, Jim, I'm really sorry. I looked in your folio and I accidentally ripped this in half." And he was just like, "Oh, don't worry, it's fine." And he said it's probably worth more now. You should sign the rip. He was so nice about it. He was probably cursing me. Actually, never spoken to me since. But yeah,
Jim was like the world's nicest guy, though, isn't he? It's like,
he really
if that had been anybody else about Jim, it's all right, isn't it? And it's funny because that period at Marvel was so cool, wasn't it? Because do you remember Marvel had been kind of, people weren't getting paid? Remember there was all those rumors that checks were bouncing and they were shrinking like crazy and everything. Then Joe came in, and it actually, sometimes history looks after you. Like if we'd been at DC, we'd have been a disaster, really, because we were contrarians and we like to think of ourselves as quite iconoclastic and everything, So at the most conservative DC period, it'd have been a shambles, especially if we were on staff where they could tell us what to do and everything. Whereas Marvel was the Wild West, wasn't it? And we fitted right in. Do you remember the first time going down to see Joe Quesada as well? That we went down on the train, didn't we? And we get so wasted on the train. We met up with Brian Hitch, John McCrae, and all those guys with Joe Quesada. There was about 12 of us all out for a pizza, wasn't there?
Yeah, in London. They had come over to London.
Yeah.
Nicky Barucci. Yeah,
that's right. Nicky was there. Yeah.
And and it's. I was sick when we got off the train. Grant was sick when we got to the hotel, and then you were sick when we got to the meal. And then John
McCrae been sick in that class.
John McCrae was sick in the poshest hotel bar in London, and a waitress actually, while he was standing there heaving, a waitress came along with a tray and a fresh glass, and she gave him the glass and took the other glass was full of noodles and everything hanging out of it, and she took that away as though it was the most natural thing in the world. That
was 23 years ago, right? And I still think about that. Like, I'll never forget John McCrae saying, "I'm going to be sick." And he just picked up an empty beer glass and he vomited to the top of the beer glass and then just stopped. It was 1 pint of sick, wasn't it? And just handed it away. It was incredible. I mean, that was like 4 in the afternoon. I mean, this wasn't like the middle of the night or anything, was it?
Yeah, that was an interesting trip, that one.
But because it suddenly felt like, you were riding a nice wave, wasn't it? We just come off the Authority. I'm doing Ultimates and all that stuff with Hitchy, and you're doing X-Men with Grant and everything. It was a kind of cool time to be at Marvel, wasn't it? Did you have a sense of it? Because sometimes in comics you don't, because you're in the house and you're just sending pages by Federal Express and all that. Did you have a sense that you were suddenly doing one of the top 5 books and everything? You know, did you have a real sense of your life was blown up?
Kind of, but I was too close to it. But I remember, like, obviously the 3 of us were there. Pete Milligan and Mike Allred were doing X-Force.
That's right.
I mean, Bendis was doing lots of good stuff. I remember it feeling like it was a good time to be working for Marvel. It seemed like, it seemed like the place to be when we were there.
You know, you had John Romita and Bruce Jones doing the Hulk, Bendis on Ultimate Spider-Man and everything.
Right,
GMS coming in doing Spider-Man. It was it was, sometimes every 20 years there's a kind of real wave of something good, like the 60s, the 80s. And the noughties felt like that at Marvel, didn't it? Probably from 2001 till about 2006. They really had it, didn't they? It was really cool.
Yeah.
And DC got the zeitgeist, I think, back around about 2006 for the next 5 years, I think, with things like, the All-Star books and all that kind of stuff. There was a really good run at DC for 5 years after that, I think. But that Marvel period was cool, though. I remember it. But what I always remember, and I always think this is so charming, I tell so many people. I told Hitchy the other night when I was interviewing Hitchy, I think you said, and your art, you have to remember this, people forget now because, you've been regarded for over 20 years as like one of the biggest artists in the States, but your art was so unusual when it first appeared. Do you remember the first couple of issues, especially after an X-Men house style that goes all the way back to the 70s, really, People were used to the X-Men drawn with this photorealistic sort of Neil Adams and the ilk, the style for so long through Byrne and Jim Lee and everything. And then you come in with this very European style. And do you remember the first couple of issues, people were like not sure. And then they loved it by about the third. And there was some fans who were like, hang on a minute, this isn't the way I remember the X-Men. But I remember saying to you at the time, and I said, do you feel the Americans are getting you? I wondered how you felt about it. But those first issue or two. And you said the most charming thing, right, which I told Hitch the other night. And you said, I can't be offended by it. And I was like, how come? And you said, because I know a lot about art, and I know I'm doing this well. And it was a weird self-confidence that I remember thinking was brilliant. And he said, and in time, as these guys understand about art and what I'm putting into it, they'll appreciate what I'm doing, And I remember just thinking it was the most zen approach to comics criticism. And by the third issue, they were loving it. But it was such a change at first. It took them a couple of issues, didn't it, the readers to get into this?
It took some a lot longer than that. There was a middle ground that weren't sure. There was a bunch of people that started buying the X-Men because me and Grant were doing it and hadn't been buying it before.
Yeah.
But for lots of the people who'd been following the X-Men for years and years and were used to the kind of bombastic space opera thing, and big lengthy kind of a lot of dialogue during the fight scenes, and just there was splash pages with tiny inset panels and stuff, there was a kind of house style. And when me and Grant came in, it changed really suddenly and really starkly. And I remember Grant and I went to Philadelphia to the first Wizard Con in Philadelphia. And there was a signing table that had Andy and Adam Kubert, Joe Quesada, Jimmy Palmiotti, I think it Garth Ennis and Steve Dillon, me and Grant, Ian Churchill and Joe Kelly. And there was just X-fans coming in with trolleys on wheels with books because they've been collecting for decades. And as they worked their way along the table, it was one of those conveyor belt signings. They were chatting away with all the other artists and writers, and when they got to me and Grant, they were just putting the books on the table and standing back. And just guess you don't like it then? They're like, you guys are Vertigo artists. You don't know what
they said that to you?
Oh, they were just like, you guys have ruined it. We're just waiting for you to leave.
Oh my God.
We'll keep buying it, but we don't like it. I mean, there was loads that were like that. But the thing is, I had looked back on various X-Men from before we started, and I could appreciate the art, but I didn't appreciate the story content. It wasn't my kind of comic, and visually, often the storytelling was not. It didn't really work for me. Sure. And Grant was telling stories that were based around the school. It was like a soap opera set in a school. It was like Grange Hill with superpowers. And so I did it like the way I would approach any comic that was set in a school. And I was aware of the fact that it looked totally different, but I actually thought, well, this works with the script.
Yeah.
And I did think people would eventually come round. And then 2015, 2016 or something, the first time I went to Sao Paulo, Brazil, amazing con. Really, really, it's like, I think it was the biggest. I think it was bigger than New York and San Diego the second year I was there. But I was doing a panel, and it was an X panel, and somebody put their hand up and said, like, how did you feel when you started the X-Men, knowing that it was going to be an iconic run?
Yeah. Like,
to rival, like, all the best kind of history of the X-Men. And I was like, I totally didn't know that that's what it was going to be. And, like, we really get slated at the time.
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't get slated by the critics, but we really get slated by a lot of the fans.
Yes.
A lot of fans really didn't like it at first. And it did take them a while to come round to it.
But I think it was just what they'd been used to for 20 years. And it's like
absolutely.
changing James Bond's, isn't it? The visual template was suddenly very different from what you'd seen your whole life.
It was totally different, yeah.
But what was amazing about that, though, was, it's a top 5 book. I'm doing Ultimates, you're doing the X-Men, and our lives were suddenly so different, weren't they? Do you remember what our lives were like 2-3 years prior to that? And we were living hand to mouth almost, weren't we? Like if a check went missing, that was a catastrophe when it was being sent out. And then suddenly our lives were pretty cool, and we were suddenly invited to these conventions all over the world and everything. And we premieres. I remember the very first premiere we ever went to. Do you remember the X-Men premiere in Edinburgh?
In Edinburgh, yeah.
That was amazing, wasn't it?
And you hired a stretch limo?
I just thought, if we're going to come to a premiere, we need a stretch limo. I didn't realise how tacky that was, but I was like, let's do it. And we all went along.
It wasn't as tacky as somebody who will remain nameless being sick into the ice bucket for the champagne in the stretch limo on the way home.
At least it was the way home and not the way there, Because it was a free bar, wasn't it? It was a free bar. So is she remaining nameless then? Yeah.
She is remaining nameless. Yes.
I always heard the rumour that you guys, because you were the last out the limo, we get dropped off first. And I remember when it went out to your place, the rumour was, I don't know if it was true, that you tried to get it into McDonald's drive-thru. Was that for real? Is it not true? No?
Certainly not, no.
I love the idea of that, though, like trying to do the bend in the McDonald's drive-thru in a limo. And then we get invited to like Australia, New Zealand, all that kind of stuff, which, I mean, I remember I couldn't believe it because it was like a free holiday, wasn't it? Do you remember?
Yeah.
They said, do you want to do, remember it was 2 weeks? So you did a week in Australia, a week in New Zealand. I think it was New Zealand first, actually.
New Zealand first, it was Auckland first and then Sydney. Yeah.
And that was absolutely amazing, wasn't it? I mean, that was 22 years ago probably now, wasn't it?
Yeah. Auckland was amazing because it was a sci-fi con in a big convention centre that had almost no comics, and it was just me and you, David Mack and his girlfriend Anne.
That's right.
Just the four. We were the 4 comic people, or 3 comic people, and we were in a mezzanine floor right at the top of the building, and we had like 20 fans or something that turned up and just hung about with us for the whole weekend. I actually remember one of those fans had a spare issue of Authority.
Yeah.
And you and I got Sharpie, and we re-dialogued with a Sharpie a whole issue, and it was the most juvenile schoolboy humour.
That must still be out there.
It must still be out there somewhere.
Or they maybe just thought these guys are idiots and binned it the minute we left.
Yeah. Maybe one of their mums found it and threw it in the bin.
Do you know, I'll never forget that guest list, because the weird thing about those faraway cons is you're all kind of put. It's a bit like the army, isn't it? It's a bunch of random people put together on the other side of the world who just become really good friends because you've all come from different places, but you're forced to get on because you're together 24 hours a day. And I remember there was me and you and Peter Mayhew who played Chewbacca.
Yvonne and his Tiny Texan wife.
That's right, yeah. And Yvonne Craig who played Batgirl and her
sister.
And there was who else was there? There was people. Somebody who's become a great friend of mine, Veronica Taylor, who was the voice of Ash in Pokemon. You know, she and I, we see each other all the time. I mean, I don't go to New York without hanging out with her, and now she's in LA. I see her in LA. She's great, you know.
Yeah, that's right. Because Yvonne Craig and her sister, they knew Elvis.
She went on a date. She dated Elvis for 2 months, I think. Yvonne.
That was his sister, wasn't it? Not Yvonne.
I think it was Yvonne.
Oh, was it Yvonne? I remember Peter Mayhew. That was the first time that I had met Peter Mayhew, and at that point he was using 2 walking sticks, you know, because he had problems with his joints. And then, more than 5 years ago now, I went to Florida SuperCon in Miami, and I just did one day because we were already on holiday in Orlando at the time, the whole family, and they'd invited me. And so the 5 of us went down to Miami and just did one day, and we went out the back. So I didn't see any of the other guests. I just went in, did my signing and left again. And we were standing out in the sunshine at the back of the convention centre. And Peter Mayhew and his wee tiny Texan wife were sitting out in the sunshine, and he was in a wheelchair by this time. And I was with Aunt Jane and the 3 kids, and I went over and I could see her like ready to do the kind of the bouncer thing. And I said, I'm a comic artist. I met you and Peter in Auckland years ago. And he turned round and he started nodding. And he said, oh yeah, you were one of those 2 drunken Scotsmen. that was his lasting impression of us from that Auckland trip.
It's funny.
Not in front of the kids, please.
Do you know the thing I always remember about that trip is, I mean, we had 2 weeks together, you know, and it was chaos, wasn't it? It was total chaos because we were away from the families and everything, and you know, license to kill. And I always remember we got drunk on the plane going out, and we arrived at what I thought was like 2 in the early hours of the morning, and it turned out to be like 2 in the afternoon kind of thing. But we were still kind of drunk. And do you remember we went for a swim in the pool and all this, you know? And we thought it was.
And then used the gym equipment.
And we came out of the pool, and I think we'd some clothes on. We were swimming in the pool with some clothes on because we'd no.
Yeah, we had our clothes on in the pool, and then we went into the gym and started going in the rowing machines and the cycling machines. It was just, everything was sold. Yeah.
I remember saying to you, why are all these people in the gym in the middle of the night? And then you realised it was actually 2 or 3 in the afternoon, and it was all these guys on their lunch breaks kind of thing watching us soaking wet from the pool doing their own machines and stuff.
Yeah, that was some trip.
But it was a great 2 weeks. And do you remember Stephanie Nadolny, who was in Dragon Ball Z? She was one of the voices in Dragon Ball Z.
Yes.
Remember she photographed every meal she had, and I was like, why are you taking these? Who are you going to show these pictures to? You know, I always remember that was her thing, wasn't it?
Head of the curve.
Who else was there? There was
a couple of different Star Wars people, because one of the Star Wars actors wouldn't ride in the same car as the rest of them.
Oh, right.
And there was a guy who had played a motorcycle cop in a kind of knockoff version of Chips.
Right.
And he'd had a big mullet and a moustache, and his cop uniform was a sleeveless shirt and stuff. He was a kind of hunky guy. I mean, I think that was something he did like 10 years before. And there was a doctor from a spaceship, and I don't know what the show was because I didn't watch any of the sci-fi shows, but he played a doctor on some sci-fi show on a spaceship. And most of the actors were really nice, but a lot of them did take themselves quite seriously.
Yeah.
And there was an award ceremony that we get invited to, and everybody had to wear evening wear for the award ceremony. Yeah. And the organizer asked us if we could go and hire kilts. And you were like, yeah, definitely. I was like, don't waste the money. And we were in full kilts, and everybody else was in evening wear apart from this one guy, the doctor. And he turned up like the man from Del Monte in a linen suit. And it was free. It was a meal with free drinks. And all of us, the way I remember it, everybody at the table was pretty drunk, but this guy was absolutely steaming. And all the actors had to give out awards at the award ceremony. And the organisers decided, just because, I think it was actually more to do with the fact that he wasn't in evening wear, but he also was really drunk. And you and I had to go up together and present the award that he should have been presenting. And later on, I mean, this was festering with him all night. He was so slighted by it. And the thing is, it was for a video rental award thing. So it was video rental shop owners in tartan shirts and baseball caps sitting about with pints of beer. And it was the person who'd like rented out the most copies of such and such a film that got the award. And it was a really, really low-key thing. But he was seething that he'd been passed over. And we all went back to our room, and we were drinking, and somebody had weed and we were having a smoke and everything. It was just, and the numbers dwindled until it was just me, the motorcycle cop, and the space doctor. And the space doctor he just went on about it all night. And the motorcycle cop was like, come on, it's not a big deal. It was quite a low-key thing. It's really not that much of a thing. And I remember he stood up and he was so angry at the motorcycle cop for not taking him seriously. And he said, everybody got to give out an award. Everybody said, even the fucking comic book guys got to give one out. And the motorcycle cop turned and looked at me as if... And for a moment, the doctor realised, and he went, I'm sorry, no offence, but you know what I mean. I actually do know what you mean, yeah. But yeah, most of them were really nice, but he was so destroyed by getting looked passed over.
Do you remember the two Klingon guys? I remember really liking, and I've always this is always
the Klingons.
They were great. They were so nice. And I remember sitting in the bar with them one night, and the guy had a good few drinks, and he said to me, "You know something? I always get cast as the baddie, and I'm actually quite nice." And I was like, he said, like, I'm a grandfather, and I like to look after my tomatoes and all that in the garden and everything. I live a nice, quiet life, but I've just got a face that people love to see getting killed at the end of something. And he said, I get into acting to be a hero, and I wanted to be like Clint Eastwood or something, a guy that people just root for. He says, but I have the face that audiences feel good when they see a hero kill me. And I loved it. I'd never considered that sometimes you just have the look of a bad guy, you know? And he was the sweetest guy on the planet. So nice.
Oh, I forgot about the Klingons. They were really nice, yeah.
Do you remember that motorcycle ride we did Sydney Harbour Bridge at 6 o'clock one morning or something, didn't we? Like, they said there's a big surprise for you tomorrow at 6 a.m. and we'd got to bed about 4 a.m. or something. And we came downstairs, and what is it? And there's like these Hell's Angel guys downstairs, and they took us on that ride around Sydney. It was incredible, wasn't it?
Yeah, and we went down to Manly.
Yeah, it was amazing. Manly Beach.
Yeah, and I had this big butch motorcycle woman who was like twice my size. Yeah.
Do you remember? Was it Manly Beach? We did David Mack, the brilliant artist David Mack. We did body surfing with for the whole day. Do you remember? We just in the water with those surfboards. And there was shark.
I remember trying it. Yeah, I had no particular aptitude for it.
But as long as you lay on top of the board, it was impossible to fall off. It was okay. He showed me the easy way of doing surfing, and it was just to lie down on the board, really. You know, it was all right.
Yeah.
But you know, my big memory of that, probably your dream and my nightmare on that trip, was, you remember the shopping?
Oh, the shopping was great. Yeah.
It was literally the worst day of my life, right? So do you remember David Mack? There was me and you and David Mack and his girlfriends, and we sort of became like two couples almost, didn't we? You know, it was so me and David Mack hung back while you and like David's girlfriends did the shopping, and we were like two grumbling 70s sitcom husbands kind of walking behind you guys, and the two of you walked around every bloody clothes store in Australia. It was unreal. Yeah. And then that was horrible.
Yeah, she was shopping for David, and I was shopping for Anne Jane. And I actually bought loads of stuff for Anne Jane, and the last day you hadn't bought anything for your wife, and you were like, "What am I going to do? What am I going to do?" And I said, "Why don't you make a really nice gesture? Get her just like one thing but go high end, and you
Yeah.
bought her a Versace top that she hated and that didn't fit her, and she was raging.
I'll tell you a weird PS to that story. My oldest daughter Emily was out with me last week, and she showed up wearing that top.
No,
I couldn't
really?
believe it. Yeah. 22 years later or whatever, she'd on. She's like, "Yeah, Mum had this and all that, you know." And she
Kind
loved
of retro. Oh.
But that was the most expensive thing I'd ever spent in my life. And do you remember that same day? I don't know if you remember this. My outfit. You probably don't remember this.
I do remember this.
You were mocking my clothes. Do you remember? Like I remember I used to be like pride myself in how inexpensive my clothes were. Right. So I remember saying to you, "How much do you think my outfit cost today?" And you'd be like, "I don't know." And I'd say, shoes £10, trousers £5, top £2, socks £1. You know, my whole outfit was under 20 quid, and you were like, "Right, I've had enough." And you took me clothes shopping. It was like straight eye for the other straight guy kind of thing. Remember, you took me shopping and you bought me a whole new outfit. You were so disgusted by my clothes.
Yeah, I remember. And the thing is, I bought stuff that I wouldn't have worn myself, but that I thought would be good on you. And it was a nice pair of jeans.
Yeah,
it was some sort of leather shoes, like brown leather shoes.
Red leather shoes. Can you imagine me in red leather shoes? But you talked.
They weren't red. They were like.
Well, they were.
No, they were like a cherry red, like like cherry red docks.
I felt like
but they weren't docks. But it was a nice brown shoe.
Yeah,
and it was a kind of denim blue shirt, but it wasn't made of denim. It was linen, but it had different panels of linen down the middle. Yeah. And that night we went out. Everybody at the meal commented. People were coming over and going, "I love your outfit. Where did you get it?"
I couldn't believe it. These beautiful girls from across the room were literally coming up and saying, "I love it." It was trainers. You bought me these red trainers. And I said to you, "I look like a supervillain in these red trainers. I'm never wearing something like this." And you said, "Trust me." And like people were actually coming up and complimenting the outfit. You said you somehow picked something that worked, you know.
Right, there you go. You should let me dress you again.
Do you know we should do this? We should go. Because I'm still wearing the 20 quid outfit again, you know, so like I need you to do this. But it was funny because I said to you at the time, I was so sure that you were pranking me, and I was like, "Look, this is ridiculous." And I remember Batgirl Yvonne Craig saying, "Oh my God, you look fantastic," when I come down for dinner that night. And I was like, "Okay, Batgirl likes it. This is fine."
Do you know, we didn't have any money back then, so I actually wouldn't have pranked you by getting you to pay for clothes that didn't suit you. It wasn't that cruel. I'm actually noticing that's an hour and 3/4. I meant to say to you at the start, let's try and keep this down to an hour, purely from the point of view that, see, when people are looking at the running time, they're always more likely to watch one that's short than one that's long.
Strangely, if you go back and look at them, the longer ones are the ones that get the biggest spikes, and it's because somebody figured out the ones I'm liking the best are 2 hours, and the ones I'm least into, they obviously are slightly shorter, which I think is untrue. But this is what people are saying. These are the
you need to say that now.
But it's really also the first Millar World Drink Up. Do you remember we were doing a panel, and we said to the group who was in the panel, we said, "Listen, we're going for a pint in the pub after this," because normally a panel is very formal, so people in the audience kind of shout out questions. And we said, "Listen, why don't we all meet tonight in the pub?" And we thought maybe 10 guys would show up, and remember about 100 people appeared in this bar. It was insane, and that became the first Millar World Drink Up. That's kind of where Millar World was born, really.
Yeah, and then we all went back to your hotel room and ordered trays of sandwiches.
That's right.
That's right.
And do you remember the plane home? I always remember we thought we were getting first class back. And do you remember somebody said to us, "Hey, listen, there's a secret. I know the airlines and everything. There's a secret. If you go up and say to the person behind the counter, 'Listen, is there any room in first class? Can you bump us up?' and everything, 9 times out of 10 they'll do it." And we believed this, you know. And we were so excited. We were like, "Oh, we're going to be first class all the way home." And we were, of course, economy all the way back, you know. But I remember we were squeezed in beside this model. Do you remember this girl? Like, you and I were on either side of this blonde girl. She was in. Do you remember this? No. Yeah. And the two of us, I think, because she was a model, we were so excited. We were trying to impress her all the way home, you know. Do you not remember this? No. And the television wasn't working, and she said to us, the little screen that was right in front of your seat, for all three of us, they said, "It's not working. We're going to give you guys 3 bottles of wine." And we just sat and chatted the whole 22-hour flight home. It was like Must have been her worst nightmare, but we had a great time. But
I remember I remember you organised a launch party for Jupiter's Legacy in Glasgow.
Yeah.
But you weren't going to be able to be there. I had to go along myself, and you told all the fans, "Don't worry, I've left £100 behind the bar." And I went along, and everybody was ordering drinks, and I said to the barman, "Listen, anything over £100, just let me know, and I'll pay for it." He's like, "What are you talking about?" And I said, "Mark left it." He's like, "Nobody left any money behind the bar." It's like, Mark.
Do you know, we get stung? We did a Miller World drink up in New York one time, and there was 100+ people there or whatever, and some people were just ordering drinks and putting on a non-existent tab. And at the end of the night, we were leaving. It was a Cedar Tavern on University Avenue. Me and Joe Quesada were the last two men standing, and we were leaving about 4 a.m. And the barman said, whoa, you've still got the bill to settle up. And it was $2,500. People had run up this insane tab. It was crazy. And I remember I had about $100 on me, $80 or $100, and Joe picked up the rest, you know. So I'm hoping he doesn't listen to this, because I don't think I ever paid him back, you know.
No, I'm sure you didn't pay him back. You didn't pay me back. No, I remember obviously that was great, Joe picked that up, but I remember when we were in San Diego, and I had a room, and you and Grant crashed in my room, and me and you phoned our wives every day from the hotel phone, and the bill for the week, the bill was $2,000.
Oh my God.
And so I phoned DC and said, I've got a $2,000 phone bill because me and Mark were phoning our wives, but I didn't realise that it cost more than regular phone calls, and they paid the bill.
That's amazing.
And when we went to San Diego to see the Wildstorm guys, and we stopped off to see Joe and Bill in New York on the way home, we were staying, Marvel put us up in a hotel, and you and I, we only used the phone a few times to phone our wives that time, but the bill was $600, and so I pretended it hadn't happened before. I was like, I can't believe how expensive it was. And Joe was like, "You need to get us $600. I'm not paying that." So,
because from there you went on, you know, to you did We Three, and then you went on to Marvel, and you went from Marvel to DC, and suddenly it was Superman and Batman you were doing, which is funny because you're not a massive comic book fanboy growing up and everything, but you've done the most iconic runs, things like X-Men, All-Star Superman, you did the Batman and Robin book. But I think you slightly break the mold as well, because I've got this theory that comic book artists break down into guys that can really draw Superman well and guys that can really draw Batman well. And I think it's to do with photorealism and cartooniness. And I think that cartoonists always draw a really brilliant Batman, because Batman intrinsically looks a little crazy, it looks a little daft, so you have to give it a cartoony edge for it to work and make Gotham City something larger than life. And Superman is so preposterous in terms of the physics of it, a guy flying through a city and everything, that I think sometimes you have to ground it in a little bit of realism. So Alex Ross works very well, Kurt Swan, who's got that Norman Rockwell vibe and everything. So the photorealists work really well with that, in a way that Todd McFarlane wouldn't draw a great Superman, but he draws a great Batman. I think Jim Lee's kind of the same. I think Jim drawing Superman, it doesn't look quite right, whereas when he draws Batman, it's fantastic. But I think you're almost the only guy I can think of that actually draws both of them very well. Are you kind of aware of that when you're doing it? That you bring a different head to each book?
No. When I was doing We Three, there's lots of the We Three script pages have got Superman and Lois Lane and Lex Luthor heads in the margins of the script, because I was just trying to get used to drawing the characters, and I just wanted to get to a stage where I could draw the characters without going back and looking at other people's comics. I had to just kind of try and make it my own. And it's funny because the only twice that I've drawn Batman outside of covers is the Scottish connection with Alan Grant, and then later Batman and Robin with Grant. And that Batman was actually what's his name? That used to be Robin.
Dick Grayson.
Jason.
Oh, Jason Todd, was it?
Jason Todd, thank you. Yes. So it wasn't actually Bruce Wayne that was under the cowl in that one. So I was deliberately trying to make him look slightly leaner and slightly younger than usual. Yeah. But no, I mean, it's just I just prep in whatever way I feel is appropriate for the project, for each project that I do. So it's not I'm not conscious of trying to do anything beyond just get into a place where I can serve the story and, you know, do my best work on it and make it feel kind of like my own while I'm doing it.
Because I think Batman has been drawn by so many different artists. It's got its own look and everything. But yours was very unique. I don't think it was really like anybody else's Batman. It had its own vibe. But Superman, I thought you had a slightly more classical vibe to it. It felt very like 1950s Superman as opposed to 70s or 80s or whatever Superman. I think there was a Kurt Swan, Wayne Boring vibe to it, the huge chin of Wayne Boring. But that's fine line that somebody like George Klein brought to it. Did you look at any of that stuff, or were you just doing your own thing?
I looked at all of it. I looked at everything. And
the shorter cape and everything, you know.
Yeah, well, funnily enough, the first few sketches I did, I gave him a longer cape, like a Roman emperor, and Grant was like, he had a short cape. It was based in the Circus Strongman, you know, and
more practical.
Yeah, so but I don't know. I mean, when I think of Superman, I do think of something that's closer to Kurt Swan than to many of the artists that followed him. But there's no point in me trying to do a Kurt Swan, you know, like there's no point in me trying to do anybody else, you know. I mean, nobody's going to do Kurt Swan better than he did it. So as I say, it was just about trying to find a way of drawing Superman where I just felt like I could draw him without looking. I mean, obviously, I started off looking at it in the same ways when I started the X-Men. I looked at lots of X-Men right from the Stan Lee, Jack Kirby beginnings. Yeah, you know. Obviously, when we did The Authority, I was looking at what Brian had done, you know, before me.
But he's a guy who didn't grow up with Superman and Batman. Like, you've got a slightly different head coming to it from me or Grant or anybody who grew up with that stuff. Did you look at the art and see anyone that really jumped out at you for each character? Is there anybody you thought, oh my God, that's like the most perfect rendition of this character? Or did it all feel like one thing to you? Was there a period?
When I was in primary school, I had one Super Friends annual that had some Bill Finger Batman and some Kurt Swan Superman, and it had some Superboy stuff. It was a story that it was the death of Pharaoh Lad.
All right.
And so I mean, the guy across the road, Sean Wilkie, the guy that lived across the road from me, he had some Marvel comics, so I saw the odd issue of X-Men and Daredevil and Fantastic Four and things, just occasionally, you know. So which were much later than the reprints of the Super Friends stuff. So I mean, I had some understanding of some points of reference. Yeah. From like before meeting Rob McCallum. You know, when he showed me all these, what was happening in comics at the time. But, I mean, I suppose, Simon Bisley, I think of Simon Bisley as being the kind of perfect Lobo artist. Though having said that, one of my favourite Lobos was a thing. It was one that Wagner and Grant wrote together, and it was called Un-American Gladiators, and it was Cam Kennedy that drew it. It was a four-issue. Great, yeah. It was a 4-issue mini. It was absolutely brilliant. Yeah. But Eddie Campbell was perfect on From Hell. But no, generally speaking, I don't have a list of he's the best artist for this character, and you know, I'm sure I could make a list.
Yeah, But
I've
nobody
just pulled a
particularly
couple of
who
names
jumped
out, but I don't have a ready list for that kind of thing. I don't tend to kind of categorize things that way.
Yeah, Jupiter's Legacy next. So like, what was great is you'd just done Superman, Batman, two like huge books, and then we could totally ride on that. With Jupiter's Legacy. Do you remember it launched at like 140,000 copies or something? It was amazing. It was so cool, and it was probably the tail end of that sort of create your own boom, like Kick-Ass and these things, Walking Dead, all this sort of around about 2007, 2008, 2009, up to about 2012, 2013. There was that amazing create your own boom. Saga launched and everything as well. So it was so exciting, but it was a really exciting period, wasn't it? Because remember, very quickly, Lorenzo de Bonaventura, the producer, was attached to it. And he was talking to all these amazing people about it. And I remember there was a few false starts where we kept hearing, okay, this movie is going to happen. Now, before we sold to Netflix, before we sold the whole company to Netflix, but that was quite an exciting time because that takes things into a different realm altogether, again, outside of Marvel and DC and everything, doesn't it?
Oh, it really does, yeah. It was really exciting. Right from when you started talking to me about it, like you were like, I've got people interested, it's definitely going to get made into a movie.
Yeah.
And obviously that was really exciting. But from a creative point of view, having just done Superman and then Batman, like the idea of coming on and just designing all the characters from the ground up and the world that they were in, and just like there was no feeling of having an editor there saying you can't do this and like this should look such and such a way, or it was just a blank slate. It was just like creative freedom and that part of it, because We3 was optioned, and it had a lot of false starts, and I quickly learned that you're best just not to think about it. You can't, you can't be asking about it every week. Things don't work that fast. So I kind of, although you had been saying right from the start, this is definitely going to get made into something, I kind of pushed that to the side. And I thought, I've got a good page rate. I'm really up for doing this project. I really like the script. I'm doing all the designs, and it was more just about kind of getting on with the work and enjoying the freedom, enjoying the fact that it belonged to us, rather than the fact that you did keep telling me, about each new person that was interested or each new step in the development. Obviously that was really exciting as well, but I was trying not to hang too much on that. Probably because of my experiences with We3, I thought, no, I'm just going to concentrate and do the work, do the best I can with it.
I think it's like I was really lucky. The very first create your own thing I ever did was Wanted, and then suddenly it's an Angelina Jolie movie. Like within a year, that was being worked on properly as an Angelina movie, and then it's out a couple of years after that in cinemas. And I was like, this is easy. This is just the path. This is just what happens. So weirdly, I've always kind of been super optimistic about things. So whenever something gets optioned, I think, okay, well, in 3 years' time, I'll book my tuxedo, for going to the premiere of this. And it's funny, like Kick-Ass, I remember John Romita was the same as you, and Johnny was like, this is never happening. And I was like, Johnny, I've just spent like three days with Matthew Vaughn. And it's like, this is the next movie he's making. And I remember us on the set, we were literally in Elstree Studios sitting on the set, and the actors, Nick Cage and everybody standing in front of us, and Johnny was like, I don't think it'll even get distributed and all that, So I think if you've had a couple of knocks, it does make you pessimistic, doesn't it? So to actually see it getting made must have been an amazing thing. And to visit the set, like, I think you have to be in it. We're so lucky that we got to experience that kind of thing, where something that was in your head is suddenly in the real world, and there's people standing 6 feet tall wearing costumes you designed. And I always liken it to, it's the closest a man can get to giving birth to a baby, isn't it? Something that was in you gestating is suddenly out there in the world, and you're standing right in front of it. It's a weird feeling, isn't it? Yeah,
it was really good because when we visited the set, I was with Angie and 3 kids, and obviously the kids are pretty big, and like I was so impressed with the quality of everything, like the quality of the sets, like the headquarters. Actually, it was like Kelvin Grove. It was like you were inside this huge sandstone building.
Yeah.
But when you went over and knocked on the walls, it was just like hardboard with textured paint on it and stuff.
Yeah.
But it looked really, really good. In that green screen studio where they had the fight in the hilltop, in the farmhouse, it was just in the costume department, you know, like everybody that was working on the show was so enthusiastic about their part of, you know, like the guys in the special effects department were like, look what we've done for this. And, you know, like Liz in the costume department, like
Liz Wolf's amazing, isn't she? I thought
yeah. But I mean, like it was really, really exciting. And funnily enough, my daughter Orla had been watching Umbrella Academy, and when Jeff King, he was one of the producers, when Jeff King found out that I was going over to Toronto for the set visit, he was like, "Oh, you know, come and visit the Umbrella Academy. We're shooting the second season," and Orla was like, my daughter was much more excited about seeing Umbrella Academy than Jupiter's Legacy, because that was just some comic that Dad had drawn that she had, you know, like she hadn't bothered reading. And whereas the Umbrella Academy was like a totally amazing TV show that she really loved, you know. And we went along and we actually watched them shoot a few scenes and stuff, and yeah, it was really nice.
I think it's also something your dad does is immediately not cool as well, isn't it? You know,
yeah,
like,
of course.
I remember when we were promoting Kingsman, we were in the Fox Hotel at a convention, and other Fox movies were on the same floor, like the people who were working on them. And there was me and Colin Firth with my oldest kid, Emily, and Channing Tatum was on the same floor. And she said to Colin Firth, "Oh my God, there's Channing Tatum." And you could just see Colin Firth's face. But the grass is always greener, isn't it? You know?
Oh, poor Colin.
But it's a cracking experience, though, isn't it? You know, and I think as an artist, it must be doubly so, because I remember on Wanted and Kick-Ass and Kingsman, you're kind of in the real world, but you literally design costumes that are 3D manifestations in front of you and everything. You know, it's a lovely, lovely thing, isn't it?
It was a really unusual experience. It was really satisfying. It was really exciting. It was also the first time I'd been in a film set, so it would have been an exciting experience for me if I had nothing to do with the comic.
Yes, yeah.
But yeah, what you're saying about the fact that so much of what I was looking at and walking through had actually come out of my head. Well, funnily enough, it came out of your head onto the page of script that I read, and then out of my head, and now it was here. It was a really odd experience. It was really good.
And it's weird. I sometimes forget there's been this big gap because you've been busy doing other things. Jupiter's Legacy, was that the last comic you did prior to The Ambassadors this week?
It's the last one I did interiors for. I've only done covers.
So what year was that? 2016 or something? Or you finished that?
Maybe 2017 it might have been.
So at least 6 years, though, which is quite crazy, isn't it? There's been a 6-year gap, and then suddenly you're back this week with The Ambassadors, which is quite a weird thought, isn't it? I mean, that's a big chunk of time. So it's quite exciting for comic fans, the idea of you back with a new book, a new number one. Pretty cool.
I hope it's quite exciting. I've only done covers since then, and obviously I've done album covers and hotels and whiskies and all sorts of things outside the comics.
Comics is the cool one, though. But what brought you back? I mean, is it something? Is there a satisfaction in sequential storytelling that doesn't exist elsewhere?
Yeah. I mean, the thing about it's what's on the page is mine.
Yeah.
You know. Yeah. Or most of it is mine. You know. Usually there's a colorist and a letterer, but where, you know, like I wrote a screenplay for a short animated film, and and it got made, and it was really exciting, and it was really satisfying. And I couldn't afford to be as involved with the storyboarding, etc., as I'd wanted to be. But I was aware of the fact that I was a kind of cog in a machine. Whereas when you're doing comics, it's like, you know, it's really just you on your own, or you and the writer, or you and the colorist, or whatever. And obviously with the ambassadors, like I'm colouring the interior pages as well, me and my son, Vinny. So everything that's on the page is mine, you know, and that's, so just being in control of everything is the most satisfying thing. I've been fortunate in that much of the work that I've been doing outside of comics has just been me on my own as well. I haven't actually been working as part of a big team. But comics is what I know best, and to some extent it's where I'm most comfortable. And the beauty of doing the ambassadors, one of the things about it, I mean, I was looking forward to working with you again, because we've worked on we worked on that short for the 411 comic, we worked on the Authority, and we worked on Jupiter's Legacy. So this is the fourth time we've worked together, so I was looking forward to that. But I really liked the premise, the kind of overall idea when you started talking to me about it, and I really liked the script. And obviously Brendan and a few others had done the designs so that there was a continuity, you know, given that there was going to be 6 different artists working on 6 different issues. But one of the things that was really nice was that because it was a long lead-in time and a very generous deadline, it allowed me to spread the work over more than a 2-year period. It must have been near 3 years.
Yes.
And obviously I was working on other projects, but if I had a deadline in one of my other projects, then I would concentrate on the other project. But if I'd been away from the ambassadors for like a few weeks, I'd be itching to get back. And when I was working on it, I would work on it for as long as I wanted, until maybe I started feeling tired, or it was time to go and make the dinner or whatever. And I wasn't under any pressure like I usually am. And so I had the luxury of only working on it when I really wanted to work on it over a really generous chunk of time. And that's, I've never approached a comic that way before.
It's a good way to work.
30 plus years that I've been working, and between that and the fact that I was colouring it as well, it was really super satisfying.
Like it's weird. Like no other art really, you know, has somebody standing over you with a watch. You know, so it is a shame, isn't it, that comic books sometimes say, you know, I need that by 5 o'clock tomorrow. You know, it's almost like a newspaper more than a comic. And for me, my whole purpose of doing the ambassadors was I'm a total art snob, right, as you know, and I've got pretty damn good taste when it comes to artists, right? So my whole thing was I only want to work with the best guys in the world. I want my 6 favorite guys to do this, and I know Travis is going to take even longer than you. You know that Travis takes a while, you know. So I mean, I've got every page Travis has ever drawn. Like I've got it in some form somewhere in the house for inspiration. Likewise, everything you've ever done and so on, you know. But Travis has done so little. I knew he was going to take a while. So I think Travis took close to 4 years to do his issue. But it's magnificent, and it's something I'm going to have forever. And it's going to be in a trade alongside you and alongside Olivier and Carl and Matteo, the 2 Matteos. And it's just, I'm going to love this trade forever. You know, like Batman Black and White or something. It's just going to be something I'm so proud to have on my shelf and be working with the best guys. And if you guys take another 6 months, so be it. I don't want somebody inking your last 6 pages. You know what I mean? It's like, it's a horrible way to do art, isn't it? So it's really nice, isn't it, that we've got this book. And what it made me do, actually, in a weird way as well, was get, for the first time in my life, performance anxiety about writing a story, because I thought, right, if Travis is going to spend a few years on this and Vin's going to spend a few years, this has to be good, you know? So I rewrote it so many times, which is quite unlike me, and I rethought it and everything, you know, and eventually come up with something that was really cohesive and really worked. I'd worked out, you know, it was set up as a movie within Netflix, and then the idea is it's a series of movies that we spin off into television shows for local language, you know. So for people who don't know what the project's about, is it's an international super team that's got nothing to do with America. It all takes place on the other side of the world. So instead of New York, the girl who puts a super team together is a billionaire over in Korea, and it's an international bunch of people who are picked as the best people in the world to be given superpowers and to be this international rescue squad. So the idea is it's this Avengers style franchise that's the backbone of it, and then it spins off into local language television shows in Brazil, Korea, you know, wherever we want it to be. So I wanted to have one issue in each territory with the best artists in the world. And that was, Netflix said to me, I only want you to make this as a comic book if you can get the best guys. And it took years, and it's finally coming out. So it feels so exciting that this is starting this week and every 2 weeks for the next 3 months. You know, this thing's going to be out there. So it's great. I'm really delighted with it.
Well, you know, it would be nice to make comics this way, you know, in general. You know, I mean, there have been loads of amazing comics that have been thrown together very quickly, and they have an energy and you know, an immediacy that you only get from doing things very quickly. But when you look at the French model of making comics, you know, like the writer writes a story, gives it to the artist, and the artist takes a year or a year and a half or whatever to draw the 40 pages, and then he gives it to the editor when he's happy with the way it's looking. Yeah, you know, and there's definitely something to be said for allowing people the time they want to get it looking the way they want it to look. You know,
do you think it's funny, because Hitch and I spoke a couple of nights ago, right? And Hitch's reason he takes a while over a page is he will cripple himself. And I'm not talking at a school. Hitch talks about this for like 2 hours on the thing, right? That he really worries it's not good enough, you know, and he redraws and redraws and he second guesses himself. And I know a lot of guys like that. A lot of my friends are like that, but I think you're very aware of your own skill. You know you're good. What do you think is it that makes you? Do you not trust your first version? Do you run through lots of permutations when you're putting something together? Or you know, what's the reason you will find it takes a bit longer? Is it just even the actual level of detail on the page itself, or what is it that slows you?
No, what it used to be. I mean, I'm like Hitchin so far as I use an eraser as much as I use a pencil. I'm constantly redrawing things if I feel they're not good enough. But I actually spend more time on the working out the visual storytelling, actually making the sequence work well, and I actually concentrate slightly less on the quality of the drawing. It's actually more about the storytelling for me. And that started years ago when I worked with Dan Raspler, and it was for that Lobo story. I sent him the 24 pages or whatever it was, and I thought he would get back to me straight away and tell me it was amazing, and I didn't hear from him for a week. Right. And when he eventually phoned me, and this was back when we were using phone calls and FedEx, you know, he eventually phoned me and he said, "Dude, I don't know how to tell you this." And he went on to explain that he liked my drawings, but my storytelling wasn't good enough. And he said, "I've written you some pointers and I've FedExed them to you. You'll get them in a couple of days." And the next day or the day after, I got this FedEx envelope, and it had at least 8 pages of notes on the 24 pages of story. And it was just like, I just read through them and I agreed with every single suggestion that he made.
It was actually good notes, good notes.
Oh, brilliant. And that's what started me on this thing about making sure the storytelling worked. But after a few years of getting more and more into this, it was really slowing up my productivity, because I would instead of just doing 1 or 2 thumbnails for each panel on the script, I was doing 6, 8, 10 thumbnails for each panel, and then doing all these different sequences using different thumbnails, and it was Grant said to me first, you know, like, what is the problem? Why are you so slow? And it was when I was doing Pax Americana, because I hadn't finished Pax when I started Jupiter's Legacy, and I was explaining to him, and he was like, trust your instincts. You've been doing this for 30 years. And he said, how often do you go back to the first or second thumbnail that you drew if you've drawn 6 or 8 or 10? I said, 9 times out of 10, I go back to the first one. And he said, just trust yourself. And I couldn't. And I had the same conversation with you a couple of months later on Jupiter's Legacy. And you said, I know a great hypnotherapist. Would you speak to Ronald? And he was a neighbour of yours, wasn't he?
Yes.
Ronald?
Yeah.
And he came over to the house, and he had a total hypnotist voice, and a really lovely guy. And we sat and had a conversation, and then he said, I'm going to put you into a light trance. And he just sat and told me everything that you and Grant had told me, like, you've been doing this a long time, you always go back to the first thing you thought of, trust yourself, you know, like, and as soon as I actually had 3 sessions with him, but after the first one, I felt the difference. And he maintained that lots of people see a hypnotherapist on a weekly basis because it becomes part of their routine. It's like a support for them, the same way that some people need to see a therapist every week. And he said, if I can't cure you in 3 sessions, then you don't want to be cured, or I can't do my job. You know, he said 3 sessions and you'll be back on track. And he was right.
That's amazing. And did it help?
Yeah.
Did it help?
It totally, I mean, it totally fixed it. And now I do a couple of thumbnails, and I trust my instincts. It's very unusual that I do lots of thumbnails or spend ages like working out how to do the page. Yeah.
That's amazing. You know, Ronnie's been around since 1967. He's been a hypnotherapist all that time. He used to have a wee tiny advert in the Evening Times, like that was an inch high every day, and people who tried to quit smoking and all that. I mean, he had this incredible career. He was absolutely brilliant. But
he was great. I really liked him.
Yeah. Do you know his wife was a Miss Scotland as well? It's quite impressive.
Really?
Yeah. So he's a really nice guy, and his son's a magician. You know, so everything about Ronnie's impressive. But like, you know, it's funny. Like the last thing I'm going to ask you is about you when you were wee. You know, because I've known you so well since we were both in our early 20s or whatever when we met. But you as a wee guy, you know, like what were you like? What kind of wee guy were you?
I started school when I was 4.
Right.
And I was really, really young looking for my age. I was always very small for my age as well, so I always looked younger than my years, but I started primary 1 when I was 4. And I'm totally average intelligence, but see, for the first few years in primary school, I didn't get the fact that you actually had to do some work. I just sat and looked out the window and daydreamed. And so I was always in the kind of the dafties table in each class I was in. And it wasn't until I was halfway through I started realizing that, like, it was only me, the dafties, that were sitting not doing anything.
Yeah.
And then I started kind of joining in, and obviously got all my O levels and higher by the time I finished secondary school. But it was just like, I think I was a total daydreamer. Every report card was easily distracted and could do better.
Right.
I was very good at drawing when I was a child. I was always the best in the class, in primary and secondary. And I liked sports, and I liked doing all sorts of things. I liked playing with Lego and Action Men and all the rest of it. But drawing was really it was my main kind of, it wasn't just my main hobby, but it was also because I was good at it. It was one of those things that as long as I practiced and as long as I kept pushing myself and as long as I was copying album covers and art books and things that were better than me, I could feel myself getting better. And I was a nice kid, you know, like I was never cruel to anybody or anything, but I was mischievous, and, you know, like I get into some minor troubles here and there, but Yeah, I mean, I came from a very supportive family. My mum and dad weren't artists, but they were very encouraging. You know, just because they saw it was the thing of all the things that I was all right at. It was the one thing that I was actually good at, and that I seemed to be very, very self motivated with. And they were really supportive and encouraging. And then I went to Glasgow School of Art and got chucked out and worked really hard ever since, you know. So, but yeah, I mean, I was a pretty happy child. I was.
Did it seem like art was always going to be your job, though? Was art always going to be your job?
That was a dream, yeah. I remember I used to watch Bewitched, and Darren used to be sitting at his table working. And I thought that looked great. But I mean, at some point, probably in secondary school, I realised that there were lots of jobs like doing album designs and T-shirt designs and murals and portraits and different types of illustration. So I started realising that, you know, some people made their living from artwork, and I thought that the dream was always just, if I could just have an ordinary wage, just enough to pay for a house and, you know, like rear a family, just by drawing or painting or something like that, that would be the dream come true. Wasn't about becoming famous, wasn't about being rich. It wasn't, you know, it was just about if I could use my artistic talents and actually pay my way through life, that would be the pinnacle.
And did your parents understand that? Like, did they think it could be a career? Or, you know, because in the west of Scotland, it's unusual for somebody to make a living as an artist. Do you think your mum and dad knew that that was a possibility?
I don't know. My dad was a teacher. My mum was a stay-at-home mum, and neither of them were artistic. So I don't know how much confidence they had in whether or not I would make it. My dad unfortunately died when I was just 21, and I didn't start getting I didn't get into comics until I was kind of like early to mid 20s.
I remember your mum was widowed when I first met her, you know, so that was probably your early 20s, whatever. So your dad, did your dad ever see you in print? Did he ever see you?
No. I was freelancing, so I mean, like I'd done a mural in an Indian restaurant, and I'd done some T-shirts for the Barras, and I'd done some business cards and things like that. You know, I mean, I was starting to pick up paying work, but it hadn't become a career yet. I wasn't managing to pay my way at that time.
Our local toy shop, you did you actually painted above the doorway.
Sentry box
for 25 years in the West End of Glasgow. Your mural was above the toy shop.
Yeah.
But what do you think your dad would have made of all this? You know, like, because I mean, it is quite a crazy life we've had, isn't it? You know, like, what do you think your dad would have? I often think about that with my own parents. You know, like, it's so unlike their lives, isn't it? You know.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, I think he would have been happy for me. For sure. I mean, my mum's very happy for me, you know.
Yeah. And Aunt Jane and the kids and all that, it's turned out not bad, isn't it? You know.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, obviously, Aunt Jane hasn't read any of my comics, but I mean, she looks over my shoulder when I'm drawing. She's like, "Oh, that's great," but she wouldn't actually read anything.
It'd be weird if she read them and really get into it. Like, she was like obsessive. That'd be weird. That'd be weirder than her not reading it, you know.
She'd start cosplaying. It's funny because when the first time we went to Sao Paulo, that was the first time Orla had been at a big comic convention. She's been at Florida, but she was like 10 or 12 at the time, and she was more interested in Tom Bancroft, who's a Disney animator, and she was hanging about his stall because he was drawing what was the dragon from Mulan called? He was drawing that.
I know dragon. You mean the red guy, yeah.
And but and she was younger then, she must have just been 10 or 12 or something. But when we went to Sao Paulo, I think she was probably about 15 by then. And it's a giant con, like way more than 200,000 people. And I had this really big line, and there was people coming up with books and shake my hand and saying it was an honour to meet me and wanting the photographs taken. There was a couple of people, as often you get, like occasionally there's a couple of people that are reduced to tears from, and all of us just gobsmacked, just like, Dad, what's going on here, But it's a funny life. You mentioned it in one of your talks to somebody else about the fact that you can go to a con and you get a wee taste of what it's like to be a famous person.
Yes.
And then you walk out the con to a bar or a sandwich shop or something, and you're completely anonymous again immediately.
It's the perfect thing,
which is really nice.
It's a VR simulation of fame, so you're in the convention hall and everybody's interested in you, and you literally take 10 steps outside and it doesn't matter, which is the perfect thing, because when you meet genuinely famous people, it's not great for them. We play at being famous, don't we?
Yeah, you get that wee taste, because as I said earlier on, there was 10 years or something I didn't go to a con because I didn't actually like the attention. I just wasn't comfortable. I'm not super shy, I just didn't like it. And went to I got invited to Toronto, and because Anne Jane's got cousins in Toronto, she talked me into going, and the first day I had to do a signing. She was meeting her cousins in the con and she'd half an hour to kill, so she was like, I'll just sit at your table and wait. And that was the first time she'd been at a con with me, and people were coming up, and some people brought me gifts, and some people were emotional meeting me, and some everybody was like, so nice to meet you. You're the reason I started drawing, or we three's the reason my girlfriend started reading comics, and it was all that kind of stuff. And she just kept nudging me and saying, what do you not like about this? And one of the things that's actually really nice is see when people come up to meet you and they're genuinely they're buzzing about the fact that they're getting a chance to talk to you and tell you what they think. You can just say, all right, thanks, next, or you can give them a moment and actually hear them out and exchange something, and it lights them up. It's like you realize you've got a kind of power, and it's actually a real privilege to have these brief exchanges with people when it really means something to them, and I used to try and shut that out because it made me feel uncomfortable. I didn't really want that kind of level of compliments or closeness or whatever. And I totally kind of appreciate it now,
And sometimes people have travelled for a day to get to see you, and then they've got a day travelling back home. And I'm always really conscious of that. I remember Alan Moore. When I was 13, I met Alan Moore at a convention in Glasgow, one of the marts John McShane used to run. And I remember handing over a comic to him, and I remember my hands shaking, and I couldn't think of anything to say to him. And he was really gracious, right? And he spoke to me, and that always stayed in my head, because I couldn't think. I was so staged. It was total stage fright, I didn't know what to say to him. So he said something to me, and he asked me where I was from. And I remember he said, thank you. And I said, why are you saying thanks to me? And they said, because you waited in line to get your thing signed. So I've always since then made a point of always saying thank you and always asking where the person's from if they don't say anything, because it might mean they're just shy and don't know what to say.
Yeah.
That's a nice note to end on. I think that's a good note.
A nice, sincere note to end on.
So unlike us. But listen, I cannot wait. 6 years, new book out this week. I mean, it doesn't get much better than that. Brilliant. So I'm delighted it's one of mine.
So am I.
Listen, I'll see you soon. I'm down in England just now, but next time I'm out in Glasgow, we should get. I bumped into Anne Jane in the toilet a few weeks ago. Remember, we were in Lucy and I were up in Glasgow with the kids, and we were in having a pizza, and we were both going to the toilet at the same time. Bumped into Anne Jane. We were just saying we'll have to get together next time we're up. We should get a wee dinner going or something.
Aye, we will. That'd be nice.
Smashing. Listen, Ben, absolutely brilliant. I'll see you soon.
Nice speaking to you again, Mark. Take
All
care.
the best then, Ben. Good night then.
Bye.
Thanks again for listening, folks. I'll catch you next time. In the meantime, don't forget, on sale this month, we've got The Ambassadors issue 1 and 2, Nemesis Reloaded issue 3, The Magic Order issue 3, and Nightclub issue 4 for only $1.99. I'll catch you later.